stuff, just say it's in the council chamber.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, have a good weekend.
Thank you, you too.
All right, and,
which primarily were plantation homes for a long time, if we're being frank, and that definition has changed over time for sure. One of our first acquisitions in 1607, or was the site of the 1607 Jamestown Fort, not to be confused with the one across the street, which was
Okay,
all the
yeah, I was about to
reinvestment
say,
and
I was-
kinds of things. This was the original landing site. Yeah, so again, the way preservation used to be done, and largely is in some states, is that you would buy a building to protect it. So at one time we owned 38 properties across the state of Virginia. Over the last 20 years we've reduced that to 9. And we've identified local groups to either operate or work with us to otherwise support those sites that we've let go, whether it's putting them in a combination of an easement through the DHR or various mechanisms like that. And we use tax credits very frequently for these sites, and we have historically. In 2012, we used tax credits to restore the Tucker Brothers Law Office in Charlotte Courthouse, which we still have. So if this never happened, I wouldn't be standing here, because we didn't used to be an advocacy organization. So in 2002, we merged with the Preservation Alliance of Virginia. Up until that time, there were 2 groups, APVA, which we were formerly known as, and Preservation Alliance. So we combined, and they had really focused more at the time on advocacy and outreach and those sorts of things, and we were the kind of old school buy and protect. So we joined forces, and that's why our mission statement has sort of gotten so broad over the years. So this is our former board chair, Ron Hurst. He's the vice president of Colonial Williamsburg, speaking at our annual legislative reception. We contract with government relations experts each year to track bills and budget amendments. In the General Assembly. The top priority is protecting our tax credit program, which y'all heard a lot about today, which really, really helps revitalize historic spaces and can address issues like affordable housing with the right compliance and management procedures. So we do a lot of this, and there will be a few sections on it. But so at the federal level, we do we sort of lean on our partner at the National Trust very often for guidance and compliance and things like that. We participate in a Preservation Advocacy Week in D.C. every year, meeting members of the Virginia delegation. This year, we're greatly concerned that the Preservation Fund by the NPS was not included in the President's proposed federal budget for 2027. These dollars fund NPS grant services like Save America's Treasures, and the DHR receives 70% of their operating budget, and thank the Lord they have not been impacted as of now. And we also do a lot of Section 106 compliance, which you heard a little bit about earlier. So anytime a federal property is being engaged that has historical or cultural assets, there's a long sort of system in which we are a consulting party for those efforts to make sure the mitigation strategy is appropriate. I'm not going to be able to read that. So one of the programs we inherited from the Preservation Alliance was the Virginia's Most Endangered Historic Places. The National Trust has a list like this. Various organizations around the country do have something similar, and there's even smaller local ones too in Virginia. This program raises awareness for threatened historic sites. It has a pretty good track record of success, certainly over half, with a range of different outcomes, but the least of which is demolition. So it draws a broad range of nominations around the state, anything from complex urban infill threatened by commercial development to a colonial mansion to a small dilapidated schoolhouse in the country. So I manage this program and can tell you that each year it's amazing to see individuals and groups sort of come out of the woodworks whenever this list is announced, step up to support. And as I'll discuss later on, we really often act as a middleman a lot in this state, sort of brokering people into efforts, whether it be for capital development, or a grassroots effort, or sort of finding people in our dense network to take the reins on certain issues. Since we are a statewide organization, it's out of a fairly small office. It's pretty hard to respond to everything, so we play a lot of matchmaking, I guess is the way to describe that. And this is part of that as well. So, the number one need for these threatened sites, as you can imagine, is financial support. And as I've discussed with some of you today, the amount of people that apply to this program are almost directly proportionate to what the perceived funding landscape is for that year. So if people think there's a lot of good preservation money available, we get a flood of applications for this program and just my general field request. In recent years, that has not so much been the case, or in the last year and a half or so, with all these sort of scares from the funding at the federal level, and we've definitely seen a reduction in that. So that's something I would probably note. But we also have seen a significant uptick in threats to downtown cores like this due to commercial development. Places like Charlottesville, Harrisonburg, Lexington, places particularly that have college pressures that are always expanding and seeking student housing and these kinds of things. So we picked up on that a lot recently. So every year, too, we host an award ceremony for outstanding projects around the state. We want to mention that to say that that cycle is upcoming, and if you yourself, I've had a couple conversations about folks using tax credits or otherwise developing historic properties. Please feel free to reach out to me and apply. That can be a great way to sort of spotlight your effort. Yeah, that's coming up as well, so get with me if you're interested in that.
Does the project have to be completed in a certain year to qualify?
I mean, we look for more recent, but these things take forever sometimes, so it really.
And the preservation award, there's multiple categories of that thing there. Susan and I went one year for community service. So there's all kinds of different categories to look at.
What's the deadline for this year?
I don't know. Okay. We're about to open the nominations.
Oh,
It's sort of
so it's just
summertime.
started.
Yeah.
Susan's about September in their award.
Yeah. It's our summertime program. Like this has become like an open seminar. We have less people now. So we also have a restoration team, and a lot of this work happens behind the scenes, but I think some of the most interesting stuff that we do. We have 6 pretty notable historic sites where they stay pretty busy. We also do contracting for various efforts, whether it's people that have come to us through Most Endangered, or just through the grapevine, feel like it'll be a good fit. This team they're very good, very detail-oriented, and they are backlogged. So I wouldn't exactly advertise them to the public as being available, but we do have them, and they're absolutely phenomenal. I'll commonly take Eric, the coordinator, along with site visits like we did today at the retirement house to kind of understand the innards of a lot of these buildings. So I've learned a lot through him. Yeah, the biggest project recently has been Bacon's Castle. They did like a complete restoration of that, and that is the oldest brick dwelling in North America. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Go into a deep dive of some of the restoration projects we've got. So Voices Remember, you see on the far left there, that's Dr. Lisa Wynn Bryan. She recently joined around the same time I did, about 3.5, 4 years ago. And she was the year before. And she got a Mellon grant to develop and support this program. So to help tell the full story of Virginia, several years ago we launched this program, and it connects descendants of enslaved individuals and tribal members to research projects, essentially of different kinds. So we administer a sum of money to usually between 5 or 10 fellows, and they conduct anything from genealogical projects to full-scale documentaries to city or neighborhood surveys. I mean, a lot of the things that we would get involved in we're supporting sort of grassroots community level preservation of these programs. Yes, this is our fourth cohort. So affordable housing. As you all know, we live in a very inflated economy. Things are not quite affordable anymore. So I don't know how much y'all have sort of heard about preservation being red tape to efforts like this. So we've really had to work in the last year, particularly in local governments, to do some myth busting in that regard. So we would make a case that preservation can be part of the solution. Preservation groups are generally sort of lumped in with, are y'all familiar with the term NIMBY? Not in my backyard. So we like to get lumped in with them because people think that we're standing in the way of progress or something like that. We're being anti-change. But smart growth is really what's needed in communities. And if more than the fact that historic infrastructure is often the most affordable to live in and rent, if well managed, that's the kicker. We think that people actually move to Virginia, places in Virginia, for the reasons of our historic character and our cultural assets. So protecting those alongside supporting growth is very important, but it can often be a very complicated equation. People tend to see it as black or white. So we're really working right now with some members of the DHR as well to potentially do a statewide survey on available housing stock that would support this affordable housing goal. Where it goes beyond that, I'm not sure, but you always have to start with a survey. So we're just trying to get data on how we can sort of help this problem around the state. Environmental issues. As you all know, well, there's flooding around here too, but on the eastern part of the state, especially in the wetlands and things, there's been a real risk from climate change leading to a sea level rise in some areas. It's interesting to see, I know like years ago this became some sort of like almost trend, like a craze. You hear about climate change and there are all these myths going back and forth about it. As it starts to unfold, you see that it really affects some areas and it really doesn't others, and might have an opposite effect in other areas. So it's more, as it's unfolding, it's more complicated than I think both sides sort of imagined, but it is definitely a problem for us at Jamestown. As you'll see, I think that's yeah, that's later on. You'll see a nice flooded picture of our Jamestown site. But so just broadly speaking too, we end up working with conservation groups, land conservation groups, with like the Piedmont Environmental Council, very close partner of ours. More recently, the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley was a connection I've been trying to mend since I live out there in Lexington. And there's a good bit of overlap there. So we end up overlapping with those groups quite a bit to monitor infrastructure impacts on historic resources. And recently, transmission lines have been a big overlap for environmental and historic groups. I don't know how, is that really even a thing down here yet? Like these big kilowatt transition lines? Probably not. Not yet. Yeah, they're coming. Thankfully, there's not a super wide valley down here, which is probably saving some of that progress. But even in coal country in West Virginia, they're starting to throw data centers and stuff up. So problems that seem like they don't connect to here, like Northern Virginia. I think 90% of the world's internet traffic goes through there, and they have all these transmission lines to support that and expand their grids and things. We'll sneak peek on our most endangered list this year, which please don't repeat this, is the Joshua Transmission Line Project, which has been around for a while, and it's proposed to go between Culpeper all the way down to Campbell County. So a lot of impacts there. We'll touch on some of that with Jamestown as well. So NAGPRA compliance just deals with tribal compliance is really what that means. We have a very close relationship with a lot of states' tribal leaders, particularly in the eastern and central part of the state. maybe the Monacan Nation being the farthest west, that are sort of actively involved in what we do. Bacon's Castle. So we'll do our first little deep dive into one of our restoration projects. This year we actually held our first Renaissance fair at the site, which is something we never thought we would do. But since COVID, to be frank, tourism to historic sites across the state has really been falling. So this was kind of a way for us to think about how to bring in more cash flow and awareness to the history at the site. So we did a Renaissance fair. It was a smash hit as far as I'm concerned. We'll probably keep doing it. I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but we had this weird comment about someone came from Texas and they were like, we didn't know this was a plantation house. I want to say, well, in Virginia, it's we have complicated history, that's just the way it is. But, so other than that one comment about what the hell am I doing at a plantation house for the Renaissance fair, I think it went really well. It was built in 1665. It's Virginia's oldest house and oldest brick home in all of North America. And it received its namesake from the notorious uprising known as Bacon's Rebellion. So you can check out more about that on our website. But I'll tell you a little bit about the $3 million restoration project that we've been undergoing there. First is brick repointing, which we learned a good bit about earlier from Gabe. So our restoration team actually has a kiln on site where we make oyster shell mortar in the traditional form, the softened mortar, which is required for pointing. And it closely matches that 6th or 17th century mortar. So that was, given the size of the property, that was quite the project. Window restoration. Picture of that. Yeah, I'll put it on this one. So we replaced 60 windows in the last year at Bacon's Castle. We discovered a lot of kind of Frankensteining of details throughout this, and we discovered that one of the outbuildings was actually originally attached to Bacon's Castle, so we had all kinds of building archaeology discoveries as we were sort of taking this thing apart. 60 windows. Foundation was not stable anymore, so we had to do that. We brought in MCWB architects to underpin the chimneys with steel rods to halt the separation between them and the building to secure that part of the superstructure. We also had to invest in fire suppression, which is something a lot of smaller historical sites are considering now with new code compliance and things like that, or have been for a number of years. And ours was certainly not updated. We had a what's it called? Halon gas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. That was installed in the woods. So the house during this time has stayed open to the public. It was open during the Renaissance Fair too, all those things. So people can kind of see firsthand what's going on, very similar to what we did today. You really see a lot of people are drawn to that part of it specifically, even if they're not super concerned with the site's history. I think people just really enjoy seeing the inside of these really old buildings. Brick dwelling in North America. Not oldest brick building, but oldest brick house.
Where do they make the bricks?
I do not. I think that's a real good question.
That was the first. Yeah. But you're saying not that brick dwelling, not brick structure.
Yeah, not just brick structure. Yeah, like formal house. Okay, so this is them doing the window repair, obviously. They have a workshop in a early 20th century peanut barn on site. This is a new exhibit. So in recent years, we've really been trying to expand the history that we tell at each of our sites. And a lot of that has to do with descendant outreach. When we acquired these sites, most of the descendant outreach we did was primarily for the white landowning families. So we've been trying to sort of fill in the gaps. I know here in Southwest Virginia, this is a less common history, particularly associated with slavery. I know many black people would go from the Piedmont, Blue Ridge areas down to Southwest Virginia to work. Often they would go back or whatever, but so these sorts of dynamics are certainly more common in the Piedmont, but we're really trying to fill in those gaps right now. And this is one of those examples. Another restoration project we've undertaken recently is for one of our 6 major historic sites is the Cape Henry Lighthouse, which was built in 1792, and one of our oldest historic sites that we've had around. One of the ones we've owned the longest. So this was the first federal works project of the new U.S. government following the Constitution, which is an interesting tidbit. And that's how important it was to place a lighthouse at the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay next to Cape Henry, which is very close to a lot of the first landings in Virginia. It was actually commissioned by George Washington, and the structure was coordinated by Alexander Hamilton. The building was designed by Benjamin Henry Latrobe. So Congress deeded us the lighthouse in 1930 to operate as a museum, and it is on an active military base, which has been a little bit complicated recently for visitation, given the situation that we're in. And there's, with a couple of our sites, there's overlap with the Park Service as well, so we commonly have to work with them for like ticketing and parking and things like that. So we'll dive into the restoration that we've done recently here. I will tell you, quarry history is some of my favorite in this state. People do not realize, they think of mining and it's like, oh, we have coal. Definitely have plenty of coal. But there we have rare earth minerals. We have rare stones like soapstone, which is one of 2 places in the world. We have granite quarries, limestone quarries, sandstone quarries. We have this really interesting geology. I'm a rock climber, maybe that's why I'm so interested. really love the quarry history. So in 2019, we completed phase 1 of the restoration, which involved shoring up the massive sand dune the lighthouse sits on, and repairing the lighthouse foundation, which she put a picture in there. That was pretty incredible. We created a new dune plaza with interpretive signs and maps at the base of the lower towers as a result of uncovering that portion. Last year, we repaired the entrance to the lighthouse in our Keystone Arch project, which you're seeing on the slide here. Due to the harsh elements right next to the ocean, the lighthouse sort of takes a beating from the weather, and much of the door surround needed to be repaired or replaced, because moisture will get in near where the rock, brick, or whatever meets wooden entries particularly. Like if you looked up today at those, what used to be on the retirement house, like the 2 square things under the chimney, I guess for ventilation, but they've been like closed up. It's the same thing. You can see how like water's gone in between because wood is not really supposed to be touching those members. So what's cool is we have some of the original sandstone blocks left over, so we had like our own free supply store of perfect materials for this project. Otherwise it would have been more difficult to source. And we had a contractor on site do the squaring and all of that. It was very, very cool to watch. Probably a lot easier in sandstone than it was for granite back in the day. So yeah, it's it was actually we found the blocks hidden in the sand dune, which we uncovered the year before. So it was coincidental that we needed to repair the top of that the following year. There's always a plan, I'm sure of that. So yes, so next year we're going to scaffold the entire tower to perform crack stitching and window repair. You're going to need a stomach to do that kind of work. I would not be getting 200 feet up in the air for any of that. That's next year's project. Large cracks will have water to erode sandstone block. I talked about it before you even wrote it down. There you go. Severe damage. Yep, I talked about that. Sorry, y'all. Yeah, Scotch down. also owned one of Patrick Henry's homes, his primary residence for most of his life, and where he wrote his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech in 1775. He recently also acquired 35 acres, I think this was last year, across the street to preserve that view shed, but otherwise they were going to build like duplexes and such. So we decided we ought to scoop that up. Yeah, we also have a new exhibit there as well, focusing on descendant outreach and kind of expanding on the information that we actually have gotten from Patrick Henry's family. We dug up a number of we have, a lot of people know this, we have physical archives, but I think we haven't done the best job of digitizing, making this available over the years. But we found some things in our collections to present there for you as well at Scotchtown. So that's all good for this year. And because of that, we saw because of that, and really the annual 250, we've seen a lot more visitation to this site specifically.
And these archives, have you found anything about the sisters?
I'll ask our museum on it. Yeah. What about?
Elizabeth Henry is associated with this.
Oh,
area,
really?
with Saltville, yeah.
Oh, very
Yeah, 3 of the Henry sisters moved down into this area. Everybody talks about Patrick Henry, but they never talk about his sisters.
good.
So,
I'll use that as a chance to grab some tea. Yes, we also host a large-scale, very family-friendly programming event at the site, including a commemoration for Henry's famous speech, which we started doing last year as well. In April, we had over 800 people attend this event, which was a lot for this small site. We were happy about that. And y'all, if you're ever in Richmond, please come to the John Marshall House. She needs some help. She needs some help. She's our least visited site, and she's really cool. Been there a long time. But I think it's parking or something. It's kind of next to all of our civic buildings in the downtown core, and it's kind of tricky to get to, but beautiful, beautiful old house with a really cool little museum in it. And that was the great Chief Justice John Marshall lived for most of his life. And we have his judicial lived as well. This site is usually used for field trips for like Richmond Public Schools and things like that. Folks who are interested in history in the backyard. Smith's Fort, Bacon's Castle is in Surrey, which is just on the other side of the river, Williamsburg. And this is another site we own in Surrey, but built in 1765. It received its name because it was the location of John Smith's attempted new fort built in 1608. Smith wanted to create a fallback position from Jamestown should they be attacked by the Spanish. But the second fort was never completed. This unique archaeological site has a 1760s manor house on the property as well. Sort of a lesser known site out of our 6. But important. The next one. Yeah. So the jewel in Preservation, Virginia is Jamestown. We own 25 acres of the site, and since the 1990s, the Jamestown Rediscovery Project, which is usually, I find most people's introduction to Preservation Virginia or APV, they just sort of know about the archaeology that we've done here over the years. You know, Bill Kelso and all that good stuff. We have tons of attendance to this site. This is really quite a financial backbone for us, which is one of the reasons we're concerned with flooding. And there's really new artifacts found here all the time. There always seems to be a dig or some kind of active work going on. So if you go down there, a lot of people will hit this and do the sort of, call it Disney World, but they do all the reenactments and that kind of thing. So this gives them more kind of historical, scientific side. That is the original site, and the other one can allow you to sort of live there. So yeah, it is under significant threat right now from recurrent flooding. I mean recurrent. Our archaeological team has identified important resources in the ground that we have not gotten to yet and are probably sitting under the flood right now. So we've had to really work with DHR and a number of state and federal agencies to pursue funding over recent years for this. We have completed a hydrology study telling us exactly where it's coming from. It wasn't apparent, but well, it's kind of complicated because it's coming from the James River in a sense, but it's actually flooding from a creek in the back, and it's sort of like, because you can see like how it's like not really over this edge, or kind of like it's coming from a creek back here called Back Creek, which is a tributary. So we figured all that out. Now we're in the process of mitigating it, which is far more expensive than figuring it out. To the tune of $25 million, of which we have raised $12 million, which is not nothing. This is maybe one of the benefits of being a very long-standing nonprofit, is that we have a donor base that is particularly involved with Jamestown and Williamsburg and a lot of that colonial history. So that's been very helpful, especially as federal funding has started to dry up for now, at least. Do what?
How do you mitigate it?
Yeah, that's the next part here. So we're going to be elevating pathways and roadways to ensure access to the site is possible even during rain events. That's sort of the best short-term thing. We also, this is the expensive part, we have to construct multiple berms. That's where the millions of dollars comes in. A lot of land moving, a lot of excavation, rocks, it's the whole thing. We just finished up a Section 106 compliance for a naval station pursuing something similar in Norfolk. We also have to construct a pump station, so when that inevitably doesn't work, we can get it out of there. We have a $12 million project, $12 million to that goal. And there's a lot of overlap here with tribal members as well, just given the land ownership and history of the sites. We've had to consult with them pretty frequently throughout this as well. But thankfully, I mean, it's really until recently, folks saw this, Jamestown saw themselves maybe rather as separate from like the core PB office, even though we're all under the same umbrella. So all to say they have a very intimate, defined, well-funded team there to mitigate these things and oversee them more importantly. Building bridges. I was talking a little bit about this earlier, but so for yeah, so a lot of the work we do here is about building bridges between efforts and sources of funding, between specialists and sites, between people and places, really. And the scope of what we do is intentionally broad because we're always looking for ways to sort of amplify the work that's already going on around the state while generating our own sort of useful outcomes in advocacy, restoration, museum ops, archival preservation, community outreach, and documentation. We do fancy ourselves the middleman. So a lot of what my role deals with is the grassroots level. So I do take my fair share of trips to the General Assembly and some of the larger venues in the state. I'm commonly called to stand in support of endangered properties and in support of efforts at council halls like this, planning commissions, all these sorts of things to advocate for resources that are being threatened. Lately, as I said, I've seen a tremendous amount of pressure on rural and urban downtown cores, and at least in the Shenandoah Valley and north of Richmond, that whole area, there's been a lot of threats from these transmission lines, because it's a viewshed thing too. It's not just, well, obviously it's cutting through your dang farmland and all that, but if you have historic towns, for example, like Waterford, Northern Virginia was on our most endangered list a few years ago. not because the town was going to have a transmission line go through it, but because they had a defined view shed in their city ordinance that said you can't have anything over X amount of feet in X or Y view shed. And these transmission lines were like 300 feet tall, and they were going across the ridge. Waterford is maybe one of the most well-preserved rural villages in the state, I think, that I've ever seen. I don't really go up to Nova a lot, but I was like, whoa. So if you're ever up there for any reason, I'd take a look at that.
Very heavy.
Yeah.
New people move into Waterford, they're knocking on their door, saying, put your house in your.
Oh, yeah. No, they don't mess around.
They have
I mean,
their,
even
they
down-
don't mess around.
Yeah, even down to like the sort of civic infrastructure, like all the original rock walls and things that line the side, they don't have like concrete sidewalks or anything. It's like stuck in time in the most beautiful way, honestly. Yeah, just a comment on the time that I've spent locally. It feels to me like developers, real estate agents, those kinds of things are kind of at odds with preservation advocates when we get into these venues. And I don't really understand why that's the case, other than like a general lack of knowledge maybe. But it seems like when I talk to people one-on-one who appear to be on that opposite side of the aisle, we're all kind of saying the same thing, except when it comes down to like specifically how these things need to be mitigated. But I feel that when we actually have these discussions together, the outcomes for everybody are a lot better than one side being like, y'all are standing in the way of progress all the time, you know, the whole red tape argument, which I've heard some of y'all talk about being a perception here in the past, versus just, you know, untethered growth. We have this perception of, oh, development's bad. No. Somewhere in the truth certainly lies in the middle, but we rarely come down to earth long enough and talk to each other and figure that out. So I've really seen a tension there, and I think the tension recently has been really due to this affordable housing thing and like how we answer that question. So that's really going to be in the spotlight for me in the next few years, is how to deal with that. Yeah, but I mean, larger than that, not to get too esoteric or zoomed out, but I feel like we're in a weird transition point in the state at large right now, where we get to sort of either reaffirm, redefine, or some combination of that, like what our shared values are as Virginians. Because it seems like we've gotten farther and farther away from that. And I feel like almost like there's these sects in the state, like, you know, Nova, DC might as well be its own state, like Southwest Virginia might as well be its own state. And you got, you know what I mean? So, sort of piecing all that together and understanding how different counties deal with different things, like some places don't have architecture review. How am I doing on time?
Before 3, but you can go.
Oh, shoot. I thought I was like too short. Oops. Well, I'll quit my rant and get along with it. How about it? Research, this was actually from college for me, but yeah, so while research is not like on our official mission statement, we found this kind of sporadic niche for offering data, and we work with the DHR sometimes too to do like statewide surveys. Our Rosenwald School Survey, very commonly used. We did sort of a mix between ourselves going into the field and actually giving out forms to all these communities to like nominate them themselves. We had a really exhaustive list of what didn't exist before, which was data on all these schools. So that's one example. I've already kind of talked about a lot of this. These are some pictures from a recent submission for a historic district in East Richmond, which was denied. But nonetheless, we pursue these things frequently, often associated with either development threats or we've done work with the community and they're like, hey, we heard about the fact that we could be a district. What is that all about? And then we'll pursue that, sometimes individual listings as well.
When you get denied, can you go back and like address it later once the horrible's been done?
I did a couple times.
Okay.
Is this the city of Richmond tonight?
No. It would be DHR.
No, DHR.
I know.
Yeah, what are y'all doing back there? No,
What makes a district isn't a district? love usable buildings, we might really want them to.
Not coming at
Mary
you, I
Ruffin-
know it's a lot of give and
Mary
take.
Ruffin spoke about this morning, is those criteria and this integrity, that has, we have to help, we're held to the standard of the NPS. So
Yeah,
it might, where it might get
Like
listed.
Park Service.
Yeah, we're like Park Service. It might be listed on the DLR, but it's the Park Service, and we have to send it up to their review, and we get them sent back to us.
Aubrey and I we sit in a room every 2 weeks with a bunch of the architectural historians of DHR. And you look at these applications that are coming in, and sometimes there are buildings where we're all like, it looks like a great building, but we just don't have the right argument for it. They haven't made the right argument, and they could make a different one, or there's just not enough integrity left. So we spend a lot of time as building officers looking at things and hoping, wishing that we could
Okay,
say,
Are these the same four things you were talking about earlier, about a person or?
Yep, all criteria, and it needs to have significance and integrity.
Well, it wouldn't be special if everything was
And that's the point, is that, it may be locally significant and historic history, and that needs to be recognized, but not everything is gonna meet the standard.
sometimes a highway marker is the best way to recognize something, or some other way of recognizing history rather than a district or a listing.
yeah. I'll just say in this case too, because I gotta sort of move this along to the last slide, but the East Richmond one was like a response to development pressure. So, I'm looking at it more as like, maybe there's more tools in the toolbox for what we're looking at here, but the people I was working with were like, let's do a historic district. Well, we'll try to pull it together, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, it's not the mechanism for everything. It also doesn't really ensure much of anything either, unless you're pursuing tax credits and things like that in terms of protection. So,
And that's why the best preservation is built.
yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
where.
And that's what I was going to say about the transmission lines, and you said the word easement, because that was such a threat because they were challenging a federal easement status. So if that were to have happened, then that would set a new precedent that even the only protection we have isn't protection. So
So just to play off of what Logan's saying, and what I'll be saying too, but when I'm meeting with a lot of you guys on site, and like when we're doing the expansion of the OH, when you're on the National Register, that's an honorary thing. You get a plaque, it's great, but really the real key of enforcement lies at each local level. So like Bristol, for example, they have historic districts, but they don't have a local ordinance guidelines that say anything. So somebody could just go into the house and do whatever they would want, even if it's an 1800s building. Whereas here, there's specific regulations for, you have to keep your wood windows, you have to do baby glass, you have to do such and such. So it really comes down to that. Or if you have easement on a building like retirement has easement with it, where you have to keep certain aspects of it.
that, just off the easement thing for a second, and that can be complicated for a property owner too, because one, it sets restrictions on what you and anybody else in the future can do. You have a whole set of compliance associated with it, and it can affect resale value sometimes, depending on what it is. So there's a lot to consider with anything that you're designating, for sure. So, do I have time to show a little bit of this? I know I started late, so that's what I
I would say show a little bit of it, yeah.
show a little bit of it? Okay. All right, we'll show you about 10 minutes of this documentary. This is not done through Preservation Virginia, but I just wanted to show it as an example of, I guess, my own personal work that came out of a preservation initiative. DHR was actually the first tip for the Granite community. They did some cemetery preservation at the Green Cemetery in Southside. Let me do this whole overview. Let me try to shorten it. Yeah, the gist, and as you'll see in part of the documentary, is that, you know what? I'm not even going to do that. We're just gonna watch it. Yeah, well, I will say this last part. So I want to show it to y'all today because versions of this story, no matter what your background is, are very common in the American South. And I talked to some of you today about urban renewal and different things like that, and this is an example of such. But just the idea in general that your sovereignty or way of life can be either diminished or even eliminated by outside forces like local government or investors or all kinds of different things. Same tricks don't work anymore, but so highways were built, rural ones cutting through farmland and hard-earned home places. Entire villages were removed, creation of places like Shenandoah National Park. I just saw 3 years ago a farm in George Washington National Forest was condemned, just taken from the government in the name of conservation, which, there you go. So I think some version of the story is applicable in a lot of places. Hopefully the volume's not screaming at you all to sleep. Whoa, what in the world's going on? Oh. Crazy stuff going on. Just ignore the confused glitching. That's not part of the documentary.
Everybody and Granny go to the moon, go up to Mr. Albert, where's the first? The moon was out, and we'll look at the moon. The first movie I ever saw was Frankenstein. He showed Frankenstein. And then we had to walk home. Like, oh my goodness. And I go through. This person lives here. This person lives. You know, I can see them. Sometimes you want to scream and cry. You know what I mean? You know, raised in a community and
Back then, just about everybody had a lot of fruit trees, and we would gather the fruit, have our little tea parties with the fresh berries and apples and cherries and all kinds of fruit. Yeah, he had pig, chicken, yeah. The prettiest corn. He had
Looking at the South, that's kind of how it was from Richmond all the way down to probably Alabama, Mississippi. And families own parcels of land. And then you raised your family on your family land. In the context of other families that were in the vicinity. So it was powerful. It wasn't a city experience, even though granted it was being gentrified and being developed. As a child, it still had that rural feel.
When you ride down and see Target and see Walmart, what I need you to do, don't close your eyes if you drive, but what I need you to do is picture in your mind fields. Picture tall fields. Picture people working, coming off of work with sacks on their back. Men, dirty from the porch, tired, walking up that hill with the sun beaming down on their head. My older sisters and brothers, they were baptized at a quarter. We'll walk down from Granite down to, I call it Cold White, where the highway is. All of that was like water from the James. The majority of Granite, I guess, was baptized there to the elderly people. I'm going to say something else to this. And I'm going to say something else to this.
For those who know it.
The thing is, when I say something about this, that's
background in rock started in 1976 over in Glen Allen, place called Tidewater Court, right on the corner of the line of Hemrock and Hanover County line. On the south side, the rock was so rough they couldn't even use a wheel.
But Granite Quarry, I'm sure they promised, I don't know if they copied of that, but I'm sure there were promises of a better life than where they were. So I think they tried to look for a promised land. I think everybody during that time was looking for a promised land that they couldn't find. And I say that because, you know, the money that they wanted to do, the currency that they wanted, the Confederate money was no more. Many plantations went bankrupt. So, you know, many owners did not have anything. That's why they made agreements to share property and all that stuff, trying to keep afloat. And the black people was like, no, I'm getting out of here. For many of them, some of them didn't have nowhere to go. But some of the young ones, they took their families, and then some ended up in Granite. You had store owners, you had entrepreneurs. When I Googled, I found very little on Granite. And what you will find is more just mentioning before. But these people had their own baseball team. What you gonna go anywhere for? You have everything you need, and during the time when you really couldn't go anywhere because it was so far to walk, you know, you produced from the ground. You know, you made do, as the older people would say, you made do with what you had. And what they did, man, they closed them in. If you really look at how the stores lined up and stuff, many of those families were closed in. Like, for example, if you look at the Davis property is, in front of the property, it's sold. So a lot of people were going to move out, not the Davis, thank God, but a lot of families were like, okay, we got to move out. And then they offer them money. Some of them got a little money, some of them might have did pretty good, but the majority got a little money. Little money. Some people in those communities, not just in Granite, but also, I know this is about Granite, but also like Churchill and different places, the highways were built in, but people had to move out. And they gave them a little money, and many of them ended up in the project.
I remember my father saying something about this lady coming to Granite. She's a black lady, and she will help the people in Granite to build nice homes. And, you know, the man that she worked for, you know, was to buy up this land up there and build homes for the people up there. That's how a lot of the black people up there sold their land. They sold their land because they thought it would be better, and that was not what happened. So you're looking for a better life. They came and they developed it the way they wanted. And that's how we lost a lot of that land. And you know, at that time, the land that the black people had was almost taken from them. They did not give them the money that they could have for that. They would have been millionaires. We didn't know. If you don't know, you know what I'm saying? You know, a lack of knowledge is a dangerous thing.
How did you feel seeing your community change? How did you feel? You know, my niece called me and said, Florine, I'm up here crying. I said, what is it? She said, I'm up here on our property. She said, y'all house is gone. She said, Grandma's house gone, their house gone. I said, yeah, we had to have it demolished because the city told us, you know, the city told us the house was old and we had to demolish it. And I said, yeah, it's gone. And it was there many years and we had to leave. This was old.
You're gonna build like a road or something there, but, insurance man told us that, told us for the last, I got scared, but I found out it was the last one, because I was wondering what would happen.
Right.
But it was sad when it was selling. Really sad. I had this magnolia tree in the yard. I had raised from a little pot plant,
that's it. Sorry I ran over time, y'all.
I would say also, if you have time, definitely say support Preservation Virginia. They do great things. Try to support all your local or statewide preservation folks. And they're doing great things, so I appreciate it.
Quick question, is the Granite documentary online on YouTube or something where I can watch the rest of it?
Not yet, but I'll send y'all a private link if you want. We're trying to figure out how to distribute it right now.
Okay.
If you
watch it.
Community Foundation actually owns it.
So whoever is interested in getting that full video, either you can get Logan's email, or you can email me, and then I can send your emails to him, and he can send it to you, whatever way you guys would like. Okay? Next up, we've got John Coates from Stained Glass. I'll go get him, but if you guys want to stretch for a minute, get some water, we've got some chips. We would all like to take a seat. So for an introduction, this is John Coates. He's from Lynchburg Stained Glass. And if you haven't seen from the different presentations, just walking around downtown Avenue, we have a lot of churches that have a lot of stained glass. We also have some houses and other buildings that have stained glass. So we had a window presentation just for regular windows, like you saw retirement 6/6. Now we want to hit the other side of it with stained glass windows that usually have lead panels. So without further ado, John Coates.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to share an hour with you and talk about leaded stained glass windows and a little bit about how to fix them, but more about how to identify their deficiencies. Stained glass is a beautiful medium. It lasts a very long time, well cared for. It tends to degrade slowly, but when it finally reaches the last straw, it's kind of catastrophic. We see panels that have fallen out that have been giving clues for years that they were in distress. So I just want to talk about what to look for, some of the mechanics of how these panels support themselves and such. And just to get started, I wanted to, because I didn't know the background of anybody here, so it's just to make sure these are a lot of the terms that you'll hear today. I just want to make sure you know what they are. So stained glass, it's a little bit of a misnomer. We don't really stain it. There are occasions when we use a little silver stain to turn the glass yellow, but generally the color is already in the glass when we get it. It's made that way in sheets, and this can be colored glass, Tiffany glass, clear glass for that matter. It can be colorless glass. If it's put together with lead cane, it's a leaded stained glass window as far as we're concerned. So that's that. I'll jump down here for a second. The lead cane itself is what holds all that glass together. Okay? Lead cane itself doesn't have a lot of strength. It really is more of a binder to sort of capture all the glass and make it work together. Because lead cane actually is really pretty weak. So we'll talk more about that. And finally, the wind bars on the window, critical. Compared to a piece of lead, these are steel. And this is really the backbone of the window. So it's one of the things we have to look for first when we're doing a survey. So today, repairs and restoration. Repairs, what I want to say is that, you know, if you have a rock through your window or a baseball, you break a piece or 2 pieces or 5 pieces, depending upon the age of the window, that's something that can be repaired in place. We cut a new piece of glass, we bend the cane up, swap that glass out, bend the cane back down, and put some putty on it. And that's a reasonable repair without having to take the panel out. That assumes, of course, that the lead is still supple enough that we can bend the flange up and bend it back down and not have it crumble off in our hand. Restoration, of course, is it's really more about identifying the need of an entire set of windows or subset and bringing them back to what is basically like new. So you're probably all familiar with Chartres Cathedral. Chartres Cathedral was built back in the 12th century. They had like 167 windows, all narrative, biblical stories, 30,000 square feet of glass. This was the Gothic era when churches' interiors got bigger, taller. Blind buttresses allowed big open walls and made lots of space for glass. And it really was a surge in cathedrals. There's beautiful cathedrals all over Europe that are just as nice as this one. But today, we're going to talk about what happened to this window. So this
So there's a lot wrong with this window. The important thing here is that this is a domestic window, as opposed to Sharps, which is 800 years old. Most of the stained glass in this country is less than 200. So the thing is, stained glass only has a life cycle of about 120 to 150 years. So, what prompts the phone call? When we get a phone call at the shop, it's usually somebody's got a window that's bowed or something has rotten, right? So, when I say bowed out of plane, this is what I'm talking about. This, I had this was flat a couple weeks ago. All right, I set this against my desk just like that. In a matter of a couple weeks, right? So it's long-term sag, if not supported, you know. So there's a fair amount of weight here, and this is not that detailed a panel. It doesn't have a great amount of lead in it, but bigger panels, much heavier, they have to support themselves. So the wind system we'll talk about in great detail. That's one of the key things that you look for when you're surveying your windows. But basically, the wind bar system and these bars have adequate end support because the bar is not going to carry any weight if itself is not connected to something. Right? So, and then the fact that if this panel were flat and if this panel were 100 years old, I would tell you, or even 150 years old, if it looked like this, I'd say 150 years old, you're lucky. It's still flat. And as long as the wood's not rotten and forces your hand into a restoration, it's good. Leave it alone. But what happens is people don't take care of the sashes or the frames. And they go unpainted and unputtied and such. And suddenly, if you have to take a 150-year window out of the sash, you're not going to put it back in. You have to take it all apart and do what we call relay restoration, where we replace all the lead.
Steel was used for your wind bar. What materials were used, hundreds of years ago?
Steel rod, usually. So in 100-year-old plus windows, what we see is round rod. We'll get into that more. But basically, those rods are wire tied to the window. What we do today, that panel doesn't have one on it, but what we do today is actually solder these to the face of the window.
So they were using that material, say, 500 years ago.
Steel rod, yeah. Just round rod. It's probably 4 inch diameter, thereabout, usually. Maybe a little bigger on bigger panels. So, case study. This is a project that I visited probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I told the owners then that this window was at risk. Yeah. Right? So there's lots of things going on here. This is 2 panels of stained glass. This is a wood sash, probably originally had clear glass in it. At some point they put stained glass in it, 2 different panels. This wood sash, one top, one bottom. If you notice, the bottom rail of that sash is missing. Gone. The only thing holding this top panel in at this point is maybe a couple wind bars that are tagged into the wood a little bit, and maybe caulk, which you can see is starting to separate at the top anyway. So the panel's already starting to slide. So this top sash, this piece is gone. It's already gone.
And this is a blow-up of that same picture, but you can see the joinery here. That wooden member that goes right there for the top sash is just falling off.
That's a lot of weight.
It's a lot of weight. And so this panel was storm covered. Plexiglass screwed to the frame, caulked up nice and tight like a terrarium. Keeps the moisture in. Now this is tidewater. This is humid down there, hot. In the 18th century, they were using hide glue to put these joints together. Anybody know what hide glue is? It's glue made from horse's hide, basically. They used it a lot in joinery because it was reversible. They could take that joint apart, work on it, fix something, put it back together. Well, what softens up hide glue is heat and moisture. So these joints get hot, they get moist, the hide glue starts to soften, off comes the sash. Now we're left with the window that's hanging. That's the same window in November. Google Streets photo. I didn't go back there. Top sash is falling. It's down in the bottom. It didn't fix it. So that's one of the things I look for when I go on site is what does it look like right here? Can you see visibly that that thing is starting to slide off? I see them routinely that are half inch off already. You can notice it pretty easy if you look. You can fix that. Maybe not push it back, but you can fix it by putting a simple brace under it. I've seen these done in angle steel. I've seen these done in a little decorative wood piece quite often. So that, just something as simple as that would have saved that panel. So, we talked about things that affect the stained glass from the outside. What about internal to the stained glass panel? One of the things is, now this, what I'm talking about is windows that are 100 years plus, okay? Which is not that uncommon now in this country. The lead starts to get soft, it's brittle. Like I said, if you go to repair a piece, you bend that flange of that lead up, bend it back down, it might break off on you. That softness can propagate into cracks at the solder joints. You look for cracks across the solder or across the ends of the solder right where it meets the lead. Lead oxidation is a big one. Do the windows on the outside have like a chalky powder on them? Because that is an oxidation process that eats the lead. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But one of the big ones is loss of window putty. And I'm not talking about the putty that holds it into the sash. I'm talking about the waterproofing putty that's put into the stained glass panel as it's made that goes between the glass and the lead cane to fill these joints and make this window waterproof. Over 100 years, the linseed oil in that waterproofing will tend to dry up, fall out, and the window gets loose and it loses strength. So all of these can contribute to that out of the plane bowing because everything in that list is tending to weaken the window overall. So the oxidation, like I say, it's kind of a crusty scale. You scratch on it, it'll come off like a white powder. That's a natural process, but it is caused. It's caused by moisture. So again, if you're covering a window, sealing it up nice and tight with caulk, creating a terrarium there that the moisture can't get out, then it exasperates this problem with the lead and it oxidates, turning to, I think it's lead oxide. I forget the term, but it's basically, looks like talcum powder. So there's an extreme case of an in-place window that has bowed. This
window is in a church that had storm coverings at some point added because the windows were leaking. So they were already 100 years old. They storm covered them because they were leaking. They went and hired a painter. The painter pulled the coverings off the windows, painted and didn't put the coverings back up, would not put the coverings back up. They ended up getting trashed. Fast forward 10 years later, no coverings. Here where we are. These windows are leaky. This is a vent panel. It operates. Vent panels typically take a lot of abuse. They're usually some of the worst stained glass in the church or any operable panel. They just take a lot of abuse. They're not usually very well barred with the steel bars. And this panel bows about, it's hard to see, it's hard to photograph, but it bows about an inch inward and an inch outward. So it's dished out here, dished in here. It really is kind of like a DS curve. This panel is about this wide, about this tall. There's no way to fix that in place. You can't push on that and push, even though I straightened that one up, in the hole like that, you can't do that. And so if it's not 100 years old and you have a panel like that meaning the lead is still fairly supple and doesn't disintegrate when you try to solder it, you can take that out, lay it on a table, Dremel the joints, or whatever you do to have to push it down flat, solder the joints back, and put it back in. 100 years plus, 150 years, you take that out, it's probably going to come apart on you. As long as old stained glass windows like this are contained in steel sash or wood sash or anything that holds them intact, an old 150-year-old window, as long as it's flat, it will service. But as soon as you start to take it out of the frame, you start chiseling out putty glazing to get it out. Usually that perimeter lead on that panel is rotten, has to be replaced. That happens. Sometimes we have to duct tape the panels together just to keep them from coming apart to get it back to the shop. So let's talk about storm covering for a moment and how to properly storm cover a window. This particular window is sealed up with plexiglass. The plexiglass is physically screwed to the face of the wood sash, and it is caulked to the masonry. It is weather tight. It's also not letting any moisture out. It's not letting any heat out. And all of those sash joints are in there cooking away. There's a close-up of it. It needs painting, and when you cover a window like this, you're pretty much saying, I'm not going to maintenance that thing for a long time. And so the sun beats through that plastic, it eats the paint up. There's heat in there, not only because it's just trapped heat in the space, but most stained glass is dark enough that the dark glass picks up the heat. So it's particularly hot in that space. So this is how we storm cover a window. Now sometimes this is, so this is our frame. This frame is an inch tall and an inch wide, and you can see right here we have a vent. It goes through the perimeter of the frame. When you blow this up into a whole window, we put a couple vents at the bottom, a couple vents at the top, vents on the side, kind of proportionate to however big the window is. Sometimes we put vents out in the middle of a big window. But what we're doing is we're creating an environment that refreshes itself. Because what happens is this space is going to get hot. You can't stop it from getting hot in there. Or moist, really. It's going to sweat. But when the sun comes out, this space heats up. It pulls fresh air in the bottom vents, throws the hot, exhausted, damp air out the top vents, dries that space out. And even though it might be wet in that space on a rainy day, as soon as the sun comes out, it's going to dry out. That's the proper way to vent a window. that space has got to breathe. And we go back here. I'm not saying that it has to be that system. You could vent this window by drilling 2 holes here, 2 holes here. They make these little round 1-inch vents. They're aluminum, they're louvered, they got bug screens on them. You could put a 1-inch hole in that plastic and pop that little vent in space, and you've got a vented window. Okay? That's what you would have to do if you wanted to vent that, being plexiglass. Typically what we use in this system is one of 2 things. We use either tempered, 1/4-inch thick tempered safety glass that does not discolor, or 1/4-inch thick laminated safety glass, which is like a carbon steel. You can see this piece. Now, if that had been a piece of tempered glass, it wouldn't be there anymore. Something would have hit it. It would have stopped it probably. It would have shattered, been gone, and then the next rock would have been right through the stained glass, or whatever that was. Laminated safety glass. You could beat that with a hammer 20 times. You're not going to get through it. It's tough as nails. It's actually 1/8 inch and 1/8 inch clear glass with a sandwich of this stuff in the middle, and I think it's called PB something or another. It's like a really heavy plastic, real tough, durable plastic. Like you go to Walmart and you buy a kid's toy, and it's one of these shrink things that you can't. You can see the toy, but you can't get through it, and you have to saw through it. It's that tough. It's really it's the best covering we can. It really is. And it stays clear indefinitely. Let's see. So the takeaway with all of that is basically cover them, extend the life, cover them poorly, accelerate the failure. The advantage, I'll go back to this slide one more. The advantage to this laminated safety glass is that this stuff right here is 99% UV resistant. So if I run across a church that has everything in their window is like covered with bright metal, it's protected, it's not painted, tempered glass is fine. They're not likely to get vandalized. If I see a church that's got a ton of painted wood, big frames, big mullions, lots of paint, and you're going to storm cover that, I push the laminated safety glass hard because of the UV resistance. Okay. So, not all things that happen to stained glass are a result of the environment or age. Some of them are built in, right? They're just not made the greatest. They're not all equal, I guess is what I'm saying. There are different lead widths. There are different lead stiffnesses. There are rule of thumb limits on the size of stained glass panels for structural reasons. That limit is usually about 16 square feet, however you want to dice it up with times height. We try to limit our panels to about 16. Over that size, they're either getting too wide or too heavy vertically, and they're hard to handle, and our tables aren't big enough, and a lot of things. But that's a good rule of thumb, 16 square feet. And then the wind bars, which we'll talk more about, but there are often not enough of them. They're often not attached the way they should be to the window, or especially to the jamb. So we have a lot of different lead widths we use, and even amongst that, some of those, like 1/4-inch lead, comes in about 4 or 5 different profiles. So there's lots of choices here. But generally, 1/4-inch lead, regardless of the profile, is similar. And I have several different pieces here, so I kind of want to share this with you. This is what I call spaghetti lead. The way this works, this doesn't have any structure to it, right? It's not going to hold up anything. So All it really does is stitch the edges of the glass together so that the glass forms a panel that spans. Right? This is kind of strange. So what does it have to do? What does it have to be to do that? Well, it's all about how much bite it has on the glass, right? So this is 1/8" lead, which means at best, this is capturing less than a 1/16 of the edge of the glass. It means that when that window starts to bow, it doesn't have to bow far to pull the glass out of the lead and you see a raw edge of glass sticking out of it. I call this spaghetti lead. We never use this. But what we use most of is the 1/4 to 3/8" inch range. It's a nice aesthetic, depending on the size of the window. Sometimes we even go to half. But you can see the difference in the bite this has on the glass and the amount of putty that you're going to get between the glass and lead is much greater than that 1/8" feature. And that's what makes this panel waterproof. In the days before everything was storm covered, these panels had to weather. And so the waterproofing that gets put in, and I photographed it a little bit later, somebody putting that in, but you put it in with palm of your hand into the front of the panel, laying on the table until it refuses out back, and then you strike it all off and let it set up like cement. And it waterproofs the panel, it patinas the lead, it solidifies the structure of the panel, it becomes a stiffer unit to handle. They're pretty flimsy, so you do that. And so there's that. So we're usually within the 1/4 to 3/8" range when we're making new windows. But I see an awful lot of windows that are failing that have 1/8". It's just not fun. So here's what I'm talking about. So this is your narrower lead. This is your narrower lead, the lead being the black. It's shaped like an H, so it receives the glass on both sides. Your fatter lead here, more bite on the glass. Both of them get that same waterproofing in there, that is to make it weatherproof. What happens though, and I alluded to this earlier, 100 years, 120 years in, this stuff has linseed oil in it, and it starts to dry up, and the waterproofing starts to flake and come out. And if you look at an old window, and you look right down the edge of the lead, a lot of times you'll see this rough little crusty stuff. Well, that's the original waterproofing coming out of the window. So once that falls out, what are you left with when it rains? It's a channel. Water blows right around. If it's a blowing rain, like a storm, blows right around that lead and comes right into its face and runs down the inside face of the window. That's why I have churches say, hey, can we just take the storm covering off? No. They're probably going to leak on you. I can't promise you, but chances are these 100-year-old windows are going to leak in full swing. Chances are that's why the storm covering was put on in the first place. What did I do, Gabe? We'll get there. There we go. Yeah, I'll get it. Good. Thank you. Okay, we're back. So this is a project, I'm going to use this as a case study. This is a project I did about a year ago. People called me, like I say, because something was bowing. They had one window that had about 1.5 inches bow in it, right across the top of the bottom panel. So it was blowing right in here, right at this joint. And so when you go look at something like that, you automatically look at everything they got. Well, it turned out they had a lot of windows that had the same potential, but they had the same detail problem. So just to describe this system a little bit, this is 1, 2, 3 stained glass panels. These red lines are structural supports, not wind bars. Structural T's, usually about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches T section, steel. They go from jam to jam. So you put in this panel, you put in a T, you put in this panel, you put in a T, you put in this panel. Okay? The thing that keeps these panels in that T is putty glaze. Sometimes it's just putty glazed here. If this were sash, it would be putty glazed all the way around and the detail wouldn't be that big. But the thing that keeps that panel secure in that spot is a wedge of putty glaze. That stuff dries up, cracks, and falls out. And does not get maintenance, and sometimes it's behind storm cover, and there's usually a pile of it on the sill outside. And so there's that. That stuff tends to fail. And their problem was that their wind bars weren't connected. So in a window, you have this weight. These are, you can't see them, so I'm marking in red. There's a wind bar, one of these steel pieces. Here, 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 and here. This weight gets carried by this bar. This weight gets carried by this one. This weight by this one, and so on. Right? But what happens when these bars aren't connected to the jam? All of this weight comes to here. All of this weight comes to here. Nothing's picking up this weight but the bottom, so it's all carried by this bottom glass. Okay? So that was their problem. This is what the detail looked like. The bar was one of these steel bars. It's soldered to the face of the panel, comes over, and stops. It's not connected. So I see that a tremendous amount. If you see that, think about what you could do, how you could get this connected. And the simple way to do that, what we did here, is we added a piece of trim, and then we put a foot bar on this. I'll pass it on. These are foot bars. They slide right on the end of that steel bar. So all it took was getting a piece of trim down the side that thing would reach. Then sliding that onto the bar and screwing it on. We fixed all our other windows so that they're not a problem now. And we took one window out and fixed the bug. So we were talking about bars and old windows. This is what that looks like. This is actually an old Conic window panel, Charles Conic. This is a wind bar. You can see it's buried in the edge of this sash here. They actually drill a hole. They drill a hole into the wood sash on both sides. They take that bar and they cut it to the right length so they can push it all the way into the hole and then pull it halfway back out into the other hole. These wires are soldered to the face of the lead. That's a copper wire. That is. So you put the panel in the sash, you put the bar in, you tie the wire. That's the old way to do it. What happens is that solder pops. When the window is stressed, it'll pop that off, and these are swinging free on the bar. And every one that pops off means that one next to it has to take more load. So watch. Sometimes you could just slide these things back and forth like an apple.
How old is that? I mean, old is how old?
100-year-old plus windows. A lot of them have. I see a lot of windows that have both because they had a bow and it came back in and they put a steel bar right under a round bar. So sometimes it's a hodgepodge. All right, I'm going to flip through these kind of quickly. These are just some examples of large window projects where the frame was the problem, not the stained glass. You can see they've got this attic frame tied back with straps. One of the clamps on here is actually a pair of vice grips. But the funny thing is, there's nothing to keep that window from falling inward. But the connection around the perimeter had rotted, and it was kind of loose, so they tied it to keep it from falling out. There's some rot in the replacement frame. Nothing wrong with stained glass, but because we had to replace the frame, we had to relet all. Same thing here. Nothing wrong with stained glass, but we had to replace the whole frame.
How old is that one?
That window's probably right at 100, probably. It's just the frame just rotted. It was built in a way that collected water down in these pockets.
How did you replace the whole frame? Take the whole window out?
We went up, measured, built a whole new frame, took a crane.
You took it down and reassembled it, or put in a piece at a time?
We took all the stained glass out of it, boarded it up, and measured for a new frame. Brought all the stained glass in its individual panels back to the shop for storage. Well, we built a brand new frame. That's all one piece. We took it up on a car trailer. We set it with a crane, and then set the stained glass back into it after it had been repaired. And we made a provision in the new frame for storm covering that the old frame did not have.
That's what I was going to ask. So is there something between, at the end of the day, when you replace the wood frame, is there something between the original stained glass and the exterior, like another piece of glass?
Yeah, we added an extra rabbet in the frame so that they have about an inch between the steer.
So the exterior protection piece of glass is still within the wood frame?
Yes, it has its own.
That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, it has its own glazing slot inside the new frame. We made the new frame slightly deeper to accommodate that.
Okay. And what kind of glass did you use as
The protection glass, tempered clear, quarter-inch tempered clear.
why wouldn't you use like a low E reflective glass? Just
We have a lot of discussions about that, and we're not so sure that doesn't trap heat in the space.
Oh, really? Why? How would it do that?
Well, it lets radiant in, but not out.
Yeah.
So that's what we're not quite sure, but that's why we don't.
Okay.
We know what works. so we just got to keep with that for now. So this is a project in DC. There were 12 of these windows. And that steep roof went all the way around. These are like clear story windows for a ballroom. And half of the sash, we replaced half of the sash. There's 6 sash per window. We replaced half of them. They were rotten. Again, no fault of the stained glass. That's just the frame. This job is also in Tidewater. That big frame rotated 8 inches in a storm. It pushed in at the top. You can see where it used to be. It used to be here. This was here. 8 inches it moved. Plus it's horribly covered. That's the new frame. And again, we made a place for a quarter-inch tempered in that. You don't really see it, but it's the stained glass is protected with quarter-inch tempered there.
So it was, one more question. So if the quarter inch is on the outside where it needs to be, how do you clean the out? Is it, and it's not vacuum sealed, what's to keep spiders and all that with that?
No. The way that's set, obviously we can't vent to the outside in a method of like this. What we do is we set the stained glass is made an 1/8 inch smaller than the opening it sets in. So it has a space around the edge of it. We don't caulk that on the inside. We don't stop it in a way that seals that. It breathes to the interior.
Okay, that explains it. But how would you, if something got in there and built a nest?
Yeah, right.
You
Well,
could see it from the outside, and you could essentially see it from the inside. You can't get to it to get it out.
yes, that is correct. The clear glass can be removed from the outside
That's what
with trim. You'd have to pull
Take the trim off.
Yeah. We don't stack it in for that reason. We don't put it all in from one side because
Okay,
of that.
that answers the question.
So this, one more case project. This is a project in Lynchburg, old church. This church had 106 windows on it. And this is the feature window over the chancel. It is 10 foot by 10 foot. It is a beautiful window. It was 120 years. So 10 by 10, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 panels in that window. This panel, bowed pretty bad. You can't see it inside. It's bowed. This panel, same way. So why not the center? The reason is this. Do you know what double glazed stained glass is? Double glazed stained glass is when there's 2 layers of glass. You can see it. See these lines? See these minor lines? They're in another plane. So there's one stained glass that makes the picture. There's another layer of stained glass that adds the detail and darkens areas. This panel in the middle is doubly thick. It's 2 layers. So it's a lot stiffer than the side panel. So the fix for this, they don't have a lot of money. We're going to re-lead this, we're going to re-lead this, we're going to call this okay for now. Because it is flat, it's service and fine. We'll come back to that one day when we are local for us. So you have to be aware of the budget. You have to work through what they can do. I mean, I would love to take that whole thing out and fix it and put it back right. But we do what's at risk the most. This is Fort Monroe project down in Tidewater, old chapel on Military Base, not a base anymore, but still a historic chapel. No ventilation in these windows. I go back to that same diagram. This actually is their diagram. That's the way we rendered the windows. These windows, a lot of militaristic themes in these windows, not really religious windows a whole lot. This is the floor plan of all the windows they had. What I want to stress here is that it really is not an all or nothing thing usually. We went in and did a survey. These were on the south side, some of the oldest windows. 2 of these are Tiffany's. These 5, that one, and we took those out. Pulled them out, took them all apart, put them back together with new lead, put them back in. That's one of them. It's a gorgeous window, and it's about 10 feet tall.
Where is that building?
It's on Fort Monroe, down in Hampton.
Okay.
It's inside the fort, actually. Some of these pieces of glass are, like a lot of these little pieces, like the size of the end of your finger, tiny little glass. It was a real bear to put that together. But that, you see we're building it back there.
How many pieces of glass
I have no idea. There's probably 1,200 pieces of glass in that window. Some of the areas in the bottom of that window are just incredibly tight.
So is that individual pieces for the being on the column?
This is, that's one piece, painted. And that's
Okay,
one
so
piece.
That's like shading.
Where it gets so intricate is like down in here.
That's
Just amazing.
How many people in Virginia used to do this? In like the 1890s, for example, is there like a directory of people who made these?
They do know who made these windows.
Or just in general, is there like a resource to see who made a lot of this stuff? Or is it just
No. I get that question a lot. Sometimes they're signed.
seems like
Not
all
very
starts
often.
with my basket. Like you from scratch.
Yeah, there just aren't very good records of it, I guess.
A question about, you say pull it out, like 100-plus-year-old, and you say you have to re-lead it. And that's probably because of the condition of the glazing and the lead bars themselves, or is it just a, why do you?
Yeah, we're going to talk about re-leading. But from here out, we're going to talk about re-leading. This is some old lead I pulled out of the box.
Is the lead hazardous?
That's 100 years old. You don't want to chew on it.
No, I mean, it's like the hand of the person working on
No,
it.
well, they're not allowed.
They didn't wear gloves.
Right. They're not allowed to eat at the table. We use,
Don't
so
eat
you have
with
to
your
worry about the
fingers.
fuse. We use lead-free solder. They don't have to worry about the fuse.
Oh, really?
And,
But the old solder would have lead.
Yeah.
So you could be breathing that when you take one apart.
We take the apart with pliers. So this stuff just pulls apart usually. A lot of times you can put a put a pair of pliers on the flange of the lead and just pull it, and it'll pull right off. And a new piece of lead, you'd have to nipper that off. You're not gonna do that.
So is there ever an old, like 100 plus window, 100 plus year old window that you would say, this is actually, if it's like sagging or whatever, they would leave it leaded as is, or you just always?
Well, some of that comes into the prominence and historical importance of the window, and you know, like I had a project that there weren't any memorials on the windows, there weren't any pictures in the windows, it was just cut glass. I went and talked to the church, and they were trying to figure out, replace versus fix, and I said, let's like this. I can pull you, and they weren't crazy about the windows artistically. I said, I can pull these windows out, make them like new, and back in. I said, it's going to cost me. First, I made sure that there wasn't any sentimental attachment to the window. Because you can't make that argument with somebody that wants that old window. I said, it's going to cost you more for me to fix this window than I can put in a new one. You tell me what to do. We'll do it either way, do whatever you want. They ended up doing that, and they took the opportunity to add memorials and add scenes and things like that, and bump them up the grade. And I think that's fine. But we have projects like Fort Monroe where you're not going to change a thing. And if you have a broken piece of glass, you're not going to replace it. If it's shattered, you're going to copper foil it back together best you can and put it back in the window. I mean, that's the objective is to save all of the original material that you can. And unless you fold. Like we would, if we have a face that's cracked, we'll epoxy glue it, edge glue it, put it back in. Don't put legs on it. It's a prominent piece of glass, and that's acceptable repair. But then the church might say, no, we want it replaced. And if that's what they want, okay. And we can paint a replacement that's near exactly that. This particular job, we have all of these windows in the shop right now. There's like 60 of them. They all buckle. They're all made kind of odd in detail, and they all buckle. So we had them all out. We're taking them all apart. And it's a labor-intensive thing. That's why I say if it's not a heavily painted window, then a lot of times it costs more to fix this way than to replace them. But we're going to re-lead all of these windows. You can see we're pulling the lead off, pulling it off with pliers, and this will just peel off. If you grab it, pull, that top flange will peel off, and you can just pick the glass up out of it. That's how bad it is. Boxes of it, and we recycle it. Yeah, it goes to a local recycler. We get a lot of people calling us wanting to get some for lead weights for fishing. We don't give it to them. We send it all to recycler. So once the glass comes out of the window, it goes on a pattern where it's supposed to be, and that becomes a glazing pattern and put it back together. In a more complicated window, we actually, like that one from Fort Monroe, we actually put vellum on it and make a rubbing of it. And then that becomes the roadmap to keep us honest and putting it back together. And this is a different window, obviously, but we haven't started putting those others together yet, so I'll just switch project. This is us just rebuilding out a restoration. You just start on one end and start bending the lead and putting it together like a puzzle from one end to the other. And when you're done, you come back and you solder every joint. You flip the panel over, you solder the other side, every joint. Then it goes through a waterproofing process, all by hand. It's rubbed in with the palm of your hand and a brush until it comes out the back. And once it comes out the back, then you, calcium carbonate, I think is what they use, like a white powder. You brush it on, you clean off the window. And this has to set up on a rack for a week to cure. So it's ready to put in.
How many artists do you have in your workshop?
We have 2 people actually painting on glass full time. We have 3 people that do nothing but put windows We have one pattern person, 3 glass cutters, 2 people making frames full time. We work on about 80 churches a year.
Did y'all do Notre Dame?
I wish. My wife and I were lucky enough to see Notre Dame.
Oh, since it was done?
No, we haven't seen it since it was remade.
Oh, that's what I meant.
But yeah, I'm amazed that they found artisans that put all that back together.
Yeah, pretty quickly, too.
I think I cried the day before I was watching it.
I'd love to see it since they did it.
So what I want to leave you with is this idea that you can go look at your windows and help spot deficiency or something catastrophic happen. That's the point of what I'm trying to express here, is that the first thing I do when I go into church is I look at the windows and I say, are they flat? If they're not flat, I map that out on my drawing. Or I look at the wind bars. You know, are they all connected to the jambs? Does everything look solid? I actually touch a window. If you rap on a window, a lot of times you can hear it rattle. You hear something loose. If they're connected to the window, are they then connected to the jambs? And if you go outside and look, and sometimes there's putty glazing inside. Look at the putty glazing. If you see cracks along it, the edge of it, between it and the middle, it's probably just sitting there, not doing anything. But a lot of times it's completely gone, and you can see the edge of the stained glass panel. And are the storm coverings vented? I think that's so important to get proper ventilation on the outside of the room. All I have. Am I out of time?
We can keep that.
Yeah, because I have a few more slides of something else. All right, anybody have a question? All right.
I have a couple questions actually. So a church in my hometown, congregation shrunk, consolidated with another. We sold the church. We sold the regular church, unfortunately. But the new owner, I was back in town when they actually went before the architectural review board to talk about this. The new owner was just a business and they didn't want to have stained glass for the publicity in business. And the deal that they came to was that they would keep, because of it being a historic building, a listed building, was to keep the windows in storage, but they would be allowed to put in other windows while it's being used as not a church. What's kind of like the safe way to store windows?
Sure, that's a good question. Are they in sashes or not?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And this was a couple years ago.
If they're in wood sashes,
But I'm just curious.
if the panels are in wood sashes, take them out in the sash. Don't ever lay them flat. Like,
Or up against the wall.
don't ever lay them like this.
Okay.
Okay? You want to store them like this,
Okay.
in the sash.
Yeah.
So if you've got 6 or 8 of these things, and the sashes are similar, find a place on the floor, stack the sashes together, screw them together, and they'll block. And put a piece of plywood on both sides, and you've created them, essentially.
But set them up right. Don't ever, even carry them around, don't carry them around flat.
Yeah, don't, right. Always carry them like this.
Yeah.
And don't carry them, well, if they're in the sash, you carry them with the wood. But if they're not in the sash, don't pick them up by the lead, pick them up by the glass. You don't want to pull that lead off. If they're not in the sash, then you can just crate them. You know, peanut, bubble wrap, peanuts, whatever, to keep them separated. Just crate them, make a crate, and put them in it. Just make sure they're in there this way.
Yeah, you want less weight.
And take good pictures of them before you stick them in there, because as soon as you decide
You want to
you
know
want to
which
get
one
rid of
goes
them.
where and everything,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's,
I have pictures for sure.
I have had churches call me and say, we want to put these back in. What kind of condition are they in? I can't see them. I don't know. And so they're crated. Well, you're going to have to pull them out of the crates so we can look at them. It happens. Yeah.
If they're out of the sash, what's the argument against storing them flat then? Like that?
They just, if you could store them completely flat, I guess it'd be all right. But, you know, you have panels that are different sizes, you store them on top of each other. I think it's just a better use of space, and it's better for the window if it's always vertical. See, these bars are going to have wind bars on, probably.
Right.
So they don't stack this way very easily. You know, suddenly you get hard spots underneath or above it. just speaking for.
That's torn albums.
Seems like you would want a sandwich that you create on Facebook individually. They're gonna take some abuse getting them out. I mean, if they're not in the sash and you're hacking out putty to get them out of a hole, they're gonna be somewhat rough anyway. Stacking them in a crate is fine.
The other thing,
So, does anybody know what I mean when I talk about faceted stained glass? Like set in epoxy. I have a few slides if you want to see them. If you want to we can talk about it. It's a art medium of stained glass that's kind of on the way out. It didn't last, but they're out there in churches. If you so you would know what you're looking at and see one. Take this a minute. It's called Val de Verre. Okay, it's a French term. These were pioneered in France. Basically, it is chunk glass, and when I say chunk, I mean 1 inch thick. 1 inch. It comes in bricks, 8 by 12, 1 inch thick. You take it and you break it up with a hammer or a saw. You lay it on the table, and you pour epoxy in it, and what you come out with is a cast panel with glass in it. Starting to ring a bell? You see these?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. They look like this, right? These things are on the way out. They are not lasting. As stained glass has 120, 150 easy, these things are failing at 70. This is a church I went to just recently. They got a ton of it. And they got one down here that's a problem. And we're talking about the logistics of remaking that panel, and they're like, oh my goodness, we got a whole church full of these things. And I said, we've got to make a decision. Either going to make the commitment now to stay with faceted, you're going to fix this as faceted, or you've got this win to make it leaded and you're one down for the future. So basically, it's chunk glass, 1 inch thick. The epoxy is about a ½ inch thick. The problems are the mixture of the epoxy. Did they get the ratio right? It doesn't like heat. It doesn't like moisture. These things, and they have different expansion rates between the epoxy and the glass. So what happens is microscopic movement between the glass and the epoxy that pops the bond. And suddenly you're either losing glass or it's leaking. And when it starts to leak, there's no fix. The only option you have is to storm cover it or recast it. And you don't recast a spot in the panel, you recast the whole panel, which means you have to break all the old epoxy off the glass.
How old were they?
That's what it looks like. So it's usually had a sanded finish on one side, sometimes sanded on both sides, because you pour the epoxy on the sand bed, and when the epoxy is poured, you sprinkle sand on top of it. It's called faceted because they take a chipping hammer and they break facets all the way around the edge of the glass. It creates this sparkling piece of glass. It's beautiful, some of it. And it makes really nice mosaic style windows. There it is, the epoxy going in. Thing is, you don't know who's mixing this. So this is the hardener and a gallon of epoxy. You put the whole thing of hardener in the gallon. You mix it up. It has a very short pot life, and it gets hot. And if the can starts to get hot, you know you better get it on down pretty quick. And you never know who did the mixing. So it's just not a good system. If you see it, just kind of a red flag. I guess.
So churches now replace, when they have this replacement with stained glass, regular stained glass instead?
They are, so we've had a few jobs that we have replaced every facet window in the church. And sometimes they choose to go a whole different route. Sometimes they say, what can you do in leaded glass that mimics that look? So we take mouth-blown, imported glass from Germany, which is beautiful glass. Some of it runs $60, $70, $80 a square foot. we edge paint it so that what you see in the sun is not this. Because you edge paint it, you can make this joint 1.5 inches wide or whatever. So you can mimic the look of the faceted glass in leaded glass, you know, if you have a mind to do it, and then you have a window that's going to last you. Okay, that's all I have. Yes?
How did you get into this?
How did I get into I'm actually a structural engineer, and I have friends that own this studio, and I was in the engineering world for 10 or 12 years, and I got hooked up with these people after being away from them for a long time, and I started, because I had this other side of my brain that wanted to work artistically, was kind of drew me in, and I did some things for them, and they were like, oh, well, it's a family business, father and son, and his father was starting to think about retirement, and he said, if you come in, you take my place. And I said, well, let me think about it. So I thought about it for about 6 months, and all it took was to be on an industrial site in a toner plant, if you can imagine, climbing ladders and having that nasty mess all over you. And I was like, you know what, I can do that. I can sit in the front pew of the church and do my field work, and that sounds pretty appealing. So, and I get to do a lot of design work. We make our own frames. So I do artistic design work and I do engineering design work. And I'm a project manager for them. So I don't actually build any of these, but I go out and watch. And I can't paint, but it's fun because it's always something different. And we do work all over the country. So we do a lot of good stuff. Probably the furthest I've seen windows go, we shipped a 10-foot circle to Africa, and we shipped a set of windows to Haiti and put them in after that disaster. And most recently, I designed and put in the new dome and legislative building and that. So we do some cool work. We do some private work sometimes. Most of it. Yes.
I might have missed it. When did the faceted glass technique, when did that come about, I guess, in America?
I think like the mid-1900s. I think. There aren't many people making bricks for it, actually. A place in West Virginia. Lincoln. They were making.
Well, I guess if you don't know the mixture, the exact mixture, you have to know that. How does that break down?
To me, to get the glass back out of it. We honestly, we just haven't done that much recasting to figure it out. Usually, if it's a window that's in bad enough shape it needs to be recast, the glass comes out of it relatively easy. So, but you know, as long as we can get the glass, unless it's something unique about it, it's almost easier to ship new glass. I mean, I'm a proponent for using everything old that you can, but sometimes it's just more than the church wants to from.
So how many companies in America do the work you do?
Well, there are a lot of small companies. There are a lot of 2-3-man places. On our level, though, you could probably count on your hand. I can take it. I mean, we do a lot of stuff other people don't, like some of these big things that require a crane. If they can make the panels in shop, they don't have the ability to put them in. So that's kind of sets us apart. Plus, we have our own. Okay.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. I will mention too that for here, for any of the presentations that are in the council chambers here, they are video recorded and they'll be on the town's YouTube. So you can listen back to them. If you want any of the slides, I'm sure that, I can share them with you guys. And then if you want any kind of information, this is the time to get them information.
Also, he's talking about stained glass, the William King is hosting one of their rooms have a display on stained glass.
It's just open, yeah.
So we will be going into our cemetery portion now. This is our chair of the same cemetery committee, so I should have prepared.
I think just add this, if you've got something specific that you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk to you about it. You grab one of my cards and we can talk later. Happy to do it.
Thank you again, John.
I mean, like you said, whatever, so, I mean, and my contact information. Just remember, note you. Oh, well,
place to, or can you guys hear me wherever I am?
This is good right here.
This is good right here?
Because
Okay.
we're going at that camera.
Oh, I have that camera right there. Okay. I'm Kate Ridgway. I'm the State Archaeological Conservator at the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. I am just going to let you guys know that Joanna Wilson Green, who is the expert on symbology, laws, grants, archaeology, will not be able to make it tonight. She had an unexpected family commitment come up that she could not miss. So you're stuck with me. I talk about the preservation aspects of it, so I can answer those kinds of questions. You will not hurt my feelings if you walk out because you wanted Joanna. So there you go. Okay, and as Gabe said, you guys can have this presentation. There's a lot of information in it, so if you don't feel like frantically writing things down, you're welcome to get this. You can get it, I think, from Gabe, or you can email me. I can give you my card at the end, and my contact information is on there. There is no E in Ridgway. That's really the tricky part. Where am I? There we go. So I usually start out with what is conservation, just because not everybody knows what a conservator does. And so we focus a lot on the materials something is made out of. We focus on what the processes are that have caused something to deteriorate. And we focus on the things we can do to help make that artifact or gravestone or whatever last as long as possible. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. So my background is both science, or all things, science, history, crafts. I do a lot of different things. I'm a little like your last presenter. I had something that I was interested in, but I also wanted to do art and all this other stuff. So my background is odd. I've been doing this for about 30 years. So before we can talk about how you're going to take care of a gravestone, you're going to have to know what is causing it to deteriorate. There are a couple different things that factor in. First, what is your stone made out of, right? That material is going to change how it's going to deteriorate. And what are the environmental conditions? Do you live near salt water? Do you live near coal, some kind of coal production? Do you live near a city? Do you live high humidity? Do you live freeze-thaw, lots of freeze-thaw cycles? So those are the two things that we have to kind of start with. I'm going to go over several types of materials. I know it's probably been a long day, so I might do this a little bit quickly. There are going to be a lot of common materials. If you're in a local area and you're interested in your local cemeteries, you probably already know what kind of materials are in your cemeteries. They are not, in general, transporting crazy materials really far. There's usually some local quarry or something, but more modern one, you can get a lot of different materials. So first we start with granite, really solid stone. It's igneous rock, so it comes straight out of the volcano. It does great. There's very little that can actually damage your granite stones. Fun part? Okay.
It's the like computer up there.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay. Another common material is limestone. It is a sedimentary rock, which means that it's not straight from the volcano. It is created out of actual sediment. So some kind of lime-bearing rock crushed together, calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate, and that creates your stone over time. Because it is one of these rocks that is made out of other smaller parts, it is susceptible to acid rain because that acid rain starts to attack whatever is cementing the particles together. It's also susceptible to freeze thaw and rising damp. I'm going to talk about these conditions a bit more later. When limestone is exposed to dilution, you can get a layer of gypsum on it, which is kind of a dark black material. And that crust eventually falls off the surface, but there's nothing you can do to sort of undo that process once it's done. Marble is very similar to limestone in a lot of ways. You see it a lot in cemeteries because it's so nice to carve. You can make these beautiful carvings out of it. But it has a lot of the similar problems because you're again working with these individual sort of grains that have been cemented together by a material, so that that material that's cementing them together can be attacked by a variety of processes. So one of the things that you can see in marble that you won't see in other stones, so it's a way to recognize that you have marble as opposed to anything else, is a process called sugaring, which literally means you go up to the rock and it's like, oh, it looks like there's a bit of sugar on there. And even to some extent, there are certain quarries that have different size particles that you can meet. There's apparently a Georgia quarry that has like really big sort of sugaring crystals that come out of the stones, but you'll be able to tell you're not really getting that with any other kind of rock. Marble also is very famous for having that sort of gypsum crust issue where it turns black, that crust eventually falls off, turns black again, falls off. So you go into a lot of cemeteries and you're seeing that sort of black surface. Sandstone, another sedimentary rock, it's sand glued together. So the quartz crystals themselves are really hard to damage, but the minerals that cemented together are pretty easy to damage. So you get a lot of the same situations that you get with the other types of stone like that, but also you're getting freeze thaw, which we will talk about in a second. Slate, I love slate. It's a metamorphic rock. It's usually some kind of gray, dark gray. It doesn't absorb water that easily, which makes it a lot more of a durable stone. So you're not getting that acid rain issue. And because it doesn't absorb water very well, it does not have the same sort of freeze-thaw issues that you might see in other stones. Excuse my fan, menopause is not my friend right now, so I'm sure it's just me. Another common material you see that is man-made concrete. Sometimes a stone is made out of concrete. Sometimes repairs are made out of concrete. Sometimes sort of furniture like edging and things like that are made out of concrete. I've actually seen one stone in Richmond where somebody took a bag of cement, got it wet, drew the information for the tombstone in it, and then let it harden, and it still looks like a bag of cement. I do not recommend that. That is not aging well because they did not turn it into like a full concrete, but it is a very cool stone. This is where we get into the same problem with that epoxy and the dog mixing it up sort of thing that from the last lecture. You don't know who mixed up this concrete. You don't know if they knew what they were doing. You may not even know how old it is. And so you're getting a lot of that maybe iffy materials and uses. So the hardness and that strength and everything that goes in the durability goes into, did the person know what they were doing? Because concrete, it's like cement and you're adding into it some kind of aggregate, it's a lot like making a fake stone. You end up with a lot of the same issues that you're going to get with marble and things like that. So you're getting the freeze thaw, you're getting different kinds of like things that are causing it to break. But one of the things with concrete that's really frustrating, which we're actually having a problem with our stairs at DHR right now, is something called iron jacking, where concrete has iron bars in it, and those iron bars over time start to rust. And that rust is much bigger than the original iron bar. And so it starts to pry open, and then eventually your concrete falls apart. So that is one of the more unique things that can happen more with concrete. Okay, there we go, brick. Brick is a fired ceramic. I mean, that's really what it is. You do sort of run into the who made the brick, what's the materials made out of, similar issues. It's usually set in place with some kind of mortar. Not always is, tombstones aren't necessarily made out of these, but you're going to find a lot of brick in a cemetery. Because of that mortar, because of the brick being sort of a fired clay, it is able to sort of absorb water, and you start to get these freeze-thaw issues. You get rising damp issues. So moving away from the stones, I'm not saying that I covered every stone ever, but there are other materials you're likely to find in your cemeteries. Iron. Iron, the nice thing about iron is it's easy to identify. Frequently it's painted black, but if you have a magnet, it's magnetic, so you just see if your magnet will stick, and then you know you have iron. If you have iron inside of a stone that you can't always tell just from a magnet because you might not be able to get close enough to the actual iron to figure that out, but with iron, you're getting that same issue. You're getting rust, it's going to fall apart. There's usually salts in the soil or in the air that are also going to make that rust happen more quickly, and that's why a lot of this iron is painted. There's different kinds of iron. Wrought iron is usually what you're going to see in a cemetery because wrought iron does a lot better outside than your cast irons. Like you've probably left a cast iron skillet in like your sink on accident and it immediately rusts. No one is using cast iron in a cemetery. They're going to be using the wrought iron. You're also going to see copper and bronze, not magnetic, but you can usually see it. It's usually going to look like copper, or it's going to look like it's green. It's going to have something like that. It's a non-magnetic metal. It's excuse me, and it can corrode. It does not corrode in the same way iron does. It doesn't make these, in general, voluminous, crazy like corrosion products on it that break apart stones and do all this damage. They tend to actually corrode in a fairly controlled manner. You'll see, though, that copper will stain the stone near it. But one of the interesting things with copper is that if you have it on a stone and your stone has a lot of like lichen or moss or something growing on it, it won't be growing where the copper stains are because it's a very effective biocide. It kills things. They put it in your pool to help kill the things that are living in there. Same thing is happening on your stones. There we go. Zinc. Zinkers are my favorites. There are occasionally gravestones you'll see made out of zinc. It's going to be gray or white. It's going to be non-magnetic. No other stone is really going to look like it. And from far away, you might think it's a marble or something because it's that nice gray color. Sometimes it's called white bronze, which is a misnomer. It's actually zinc. And it survives remarkably well. Frequently, you'll see them painted a lot like iron gets painted frequently at cemeteries. And excuse me. And unless they're manufactured with some kind of copper, they are going to last really well. The copper and the zinc don't play nice together. They have something called galvanic corrosion, and so it causes the marker to corrode more quickly. There's literally nothing you can do about that. But keeping your zinc stones painted does help. Okay. We very quickly went over materials you find in a cemetery. I did not cover wood. I did not cover glass and photography. If you have any of those, please feel free to get in touch. Now we're going to talk about what conservators call the agents of deterioration. Very ominous. These are the things that attack artifacts. These are the types of factors we expect to see. Not all of them you see a ton in cemeteries as an issue, but they all have a role to play in deteriorating artifacts. So, direct physical forces. This is your earthquakes. This is vandals hitting things with baseball bats. This is lawnmowers. It's a benign but real problem. This is people hitting things with weed whackers because they have too hard a string on it. They don't have the softer strings. This is from well-meaning people using metal brushes to scratch surfaces of stones. Well, there are all sorts of things, but it's literally physically you are damaging the stone. Then we have vandalism. Here you can see a 100-year-old elk statue that was cut off at the feet and sold for scrap by people who broke into a cemetery. I think it's in South Carolina, I can't remember. It was actually an elk cemetery. They put up the elk, and then somebody came in the middle of the night, cut off the statue, left the base, and sold the metal for scrap. You see a lot more of vandalism in times of need, in economic, when people are in economic distress. There's a lot of lead. It can sell for a lot of money. There's a lot of copper. It can sell for a lot of money. People will dig up graves to try and find grave goods to sell them if they know it's sort of like a place where people might bury people with medals or jewelry or things like that. This is really, this is something that you'll know about your cemetery as far as like, are you getting people in there at night doing vandalism? Spray painting, this is what vandalism is. There's nothing safe from vandalism.
Did they get the elk back?
Nope.
Oh.
No, this was during the recession, I think in like close to like 2009, I want to say. Yeah. And so, you'll have that people stealing this same kind of like metals and stuff from abandoned houses. This is when like leaded windows, copper piping goes missing from houses and things like that. So. Right, exactly. Same thing happens to a cemetery because there's frequently not anybody there to keep an eye on it, especially historic one at night. So yeah. Then we have fire damage. That's one of the things that can happen. Can be anything from wildfires, church burns down near the cemetery that it has been associated with. Even memorial fires can be a problem if they're ever burning fires and they're using materials that are leaving soot or causing heat damage and things like that. And then campfires, if you have an unhoused population who is using the cemetery as a safe place to sleep, sometimes they will make campfires. So this is the kind of thing when I'm talking about you can get fire damage. Then we have water. It's really anything. It can be a flood. You can have flash floods. You can have floods literally washing things away from hurricanes. You look like you have a question. Did I put the wrong? Oh my gosh, I did. Okay, well now I'm embarrassed.
How'd you find this place today?
I know, right? No. Normally I'm better. I grew up in Virginia. Normally I do not misspell that. I blame word. So with water damage, you're talking about things like floods. You're talking about erosion over time. We're in Virginia. It rains a lot. You're talking about like it's the same way the Grand Canyon was formed. It's going to mess up your stones as well. Granite, like we said, is resistant to this, but most stones are susceptible. And if you're talking about 100 years, 200 years of rain, it takes its toll. Then there's biological damage. Very common in a cemetery. You're talking about anything from plant growth because you have a nice shady spot and the lichen has started to grow and the moss has started to grow. And then you have these big trees with big roots that are ripping things up. You have lovely trees and lovely stones, and then the birds come and land on them and poop on them. You have people walking their dogs. There's lots of ways animals can damage your stones. Then we have pollution. This is where that gypsum crust comes in. You can have acid rain. We have a lot less of that now. We're not dealing with leaded cars as much and things like that. But there is still a certain amount of acid rain that could be created. And it's not like acid rain, you go out there and you guys know, it's not like that, but it's acid enough that over time it causes a huge problem. And if you're in a place where you're going to have a lot of sulfur in the air, that sulfur is going to cause these gypsum crusts. And it really is that it is forming a chemical bond with the surface of that stone. There's nothing to undo it. And over time, it cracks off, takes that surface with it, and then it just starts the cycle all over again. It's just the nature of the beast with this one. Then we can have light damage, which is really rare in cemeteries. Few cases of things where you're going to have agents of deterioration are going to be if you have wood in your cemetery, which is not common, but not unheard of. And if you have framed photographs, you're going to get that same problem he was talking about with stained glass, where you're having like a little terrarium because it's like sealed onto your stone, and that photograph is over time going to be problematic. It might even fade because of UV damage and things like that. So, but in general, rocks are fine. I think amethyst is one of the few rocks that loses its color over time when it's exposed to light. So, not usually much of an issue. Then we have incorrect temperature, which can cause several things. The main one you're going to see in cemeteries is this freeze-thaw cycle, which I bet you guys have quite a bit here, and having done. You're welcome. Because what happens is When you're not quite in winter and you're not quite in fall, there's this period in the middle where the water on your stone is freezing at night, and then it melts during the day, and then it freezes at night, and then it melts during the day, and it's going to go into all of these little cracks and crevices. It's going to flow everywhere. And as hopefully we all learned in school, ice is bigger, takes up more space than your water. So slowly, it's literally just like the iron corrosion, prying everything open, and eventually the whole thing falls over. That's the sort of cold side of things. The hot side of things is that high temperatures just make every chemical reaction pretty much happier. It loves heat. Your things that, like your biologicals that are growing, usually love heat. Any kind of acid rain, all that acid destruction, going to be happier in heat. So there's two ways that sort of temperature can affect your deterioration. Then there's humidity damage. Humidity is where rusting comes in, because if you have a humid environment, you've got salt in your ground, which you probably do, you're going to get that rusting happening. This is how you're going to get your corrosion stains, because the humidity is going to make the copper or everything else go into your stones. And you're also going to get salt damage, which is rising damp. That's like you get in your house, you've probably seen it. If you've ever been in the basement of Mount Vernon, I highly recommend it. They have a nightmare of a salt damage problem. I think they've probably replaced most of the stones at this point. Have you seen that?
No, but I'm just thinking that's not, most people go to Mount Vernon, I love it.
I used to work there, so yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that's why you go to Mount Vernon, to go look at George Washington's basement. So what happens is that this water literally rises out of the ground. It sort of has this capillary action. It comes up through the stone, and then it dries out, and then the salt that's in the water, that's dissolved in the water, recrystallizes. And so then you have crystals inside your stone. And then you're having the exact same thing that happens with your ice and your rust. Those crystals get deposited, and then they get deposited more, and then they get deposited more, and eventually the whole thing bursts apart. So you have the front burst off, the whole thing can go. At Mount Vernon, you could literally see holes through entire giant sandstone blocks because they were having such an issue. So then they gang up. So, did I spell it wrong again? I apologize to all of the citizens of Abingdon. I will immediately fix this when I get home, and now I'm super embarrassed.
Thank you.
So I will say this is from 13 years ago, and I have not looked at it. So now everybody I've given this lecture to has the wrong spelling. I know I am. Okay. Oh man, I'm never gonna be allowed back. So then you're getting this like high humidity. You're getting low light levels from the plants. You're getting like it's high temperature because this is Virginia. You're getting all these temperature control problems. You're getting biological growth. And then your moss holds in moisture, which causes moisture damage. Your trees are causing that moss to grow faster and lichens to it be encouraged to grow. And then all this plant life can cause staining on your stone. And then it can cause acid rain to stick around longer, and on and on and on. So you're almost never getting one of these agents of deterioration. You're usually getting a plethora of them.
What's funny is around at that stone, there are no trees.
This stone in particular? Because I didn't take this picture. I actually have never been here. These pictures are from the previous conservator when we had a cemetery workshop here 2010.
Okay.
And so that was a different conservator.
So they're the ones who actually
They did, but I didn't want to I didn't want to throw them under the bus. I basically stole all their pictures, so it's like seems fair that it's my own fault too. Okay, so how are we going to approach cemetery preservation? The techniques might vary, but there's always going to be three things. Preventive maintenance, because while it is boring and frustrating, if you can prevent something in the first place, it saves you a lot of time and a lot of money in particular later. Minimal intervention. One of the names of the game in conservation is that we do as little as we can to get the result that we need. So we're not going to go over the top every single time. Is this something where we're doing enough cleaning so we can read it? Is this something where it's the 100th anniversary of the church and we really want to make it shine? What is the goal of the reason that you were actually treating this artifact, cleaning these stones? And reversibility, which I will say, not always an option with cemeteries because you're outside, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of these agents of deterioration doing their job. Reversibility as much as we can. More like retreatability. If we can treat it again, that's the goal. Because we don't want to make a problem worse by adding something that in 100 years we realize, oh my gosh, that was the wrong thing to do. We're doing our best now, but we're not perfect. Okay, preventive maintenance, pretty obvious. We're trying to do routine maintenance to reduce future damage. You're going to be doing things like this. Things like mowing the lawn, raking the leaves, trying to make sure that when people are mowing the lawns or doing anything, they're not just like piling up leaves and grass cuttings and stuff on your stone because that will probably cause staining. It'll encourage biological things to grow. Things like getting an arborist to do branch removal and tree removal before storm season, whichever your storm season is. There's usually kind of two in Virginia. You're getting like the sort of hurricane season, which I don't know how much you get that around here as far as the winds by the time they've gotten to this part of Virginia. Yeah, more and more. And then ice season, where you're getting these ice storms that are going to pull down these different tree branches. I am very clear, you need a trained arborist. Nobody who doesn't know what they're doing should be getting into a tree, especially an old tree, because they need to be able to also lower it down because taking down a tree or taking down branches can also harm artifacts because then you have just dropped everything. And then if you follow one, that's also bad. Minimal intervention. Least invasive thing, most gentle method. We're talking we don't want to do anything metal, so we're talking boar's bristle brushes, plastic brushes, soft toothbrushes, things like that. Anything that's going to be soft on the stone, the stones are more susceptible to damage than you'd probably think. Especially sugaring marble where you're just taking that surface off because it's already loose. We are not using metal brushes because that will definitely damage your stone. The other thing that happens with metal brushes is that you leave metal filings behind that then rust later. And so you become not only scratch marks, but then they will be red scratch marks someday. So we want to make sure that we're trying to avoid that. This is some examples of not particularly reversible things. If you have to add something to the stone, let's make sure it's something that's going to be sympathetic to the stone. So let's talk about using historic mortars. Let's talk about using adhesives that can be reversed. Let's not talk about putting giant metal, especially iron pins and things. You don't want to damage any of the wording on the stone. When you have something like this, you have all of these pins going through, and then all of a sudden, all of those pins become sites where the rust, and then it just breaks right down there, and then you've lost everything that's written on the other side. Everything is gone with that stone.
Is there any way to reverse? I mean, I understand why people did that.
Oh, God, yeah.
Today, but today, is there any way to actually go in and to amend that, to take that out?
There are ways. You have to be a professional because it involves drilling them out, and that is a nightmare and very dangerous. So you can, I would say, it's probably, you would definitely want to talk to a conservator to see if it's worth it, and if it's going to be more, if it's going to cause more damage to undo it than to leave it, and maybe create a replica stone while you can read things and stuff like that. Yeah. So
I think it spelled correctly on that.
I did that one. That's one of mine. Sorry, it's cracking me up. So here's the thing. There are certain things that you need to think about before you do anything. And this is where Joanna is usually coming in with the legal stuff, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. Do you have permission to do anything in this cemetery. Because if you do not have permission, you are now the vandal, legally, according to the state of Virginia. So get permission in writing from the person who owns the property. The family members do not necessarily own the ability to do work. They usually have to work through whoever owns the cemetery. So you need to make sure you're doing it legally. Step 1. Step 2, evaluate the marker. Is it too dangerous to be around? Is it going to fall over? Is the surface about to fall off? You can gently tap the surface and see if it's going to fall off. You can actually see in this one, this is from Hollywood Cemetery, which I did spell right. This whole front facing of the sandstone, it's just slipped down. And so it's all in one piece, and so you might not notice right away, but the whole face of it just broke away and slipped down and then stopped. And so you have to be careful for looking for things like that.
How would you conserve that?
That one is probably too far gone. That would be photography, discussing creating a replica. There's the things that have been tried to put sandstone back together generally do not work well, or for a long length of time. And so that one, probably a goner.
If it were a really magnificent example of carving, could you take that top layer?
Yeah.
And put it flat in a box in a case so that people can look at it somewhere else off-site?
Yeah, and I would agree with the stained glass, that because when you have something flat and thin, it's so hard to like pick it up safely. When you have it flat, you would still end up probably mounting it to something to give you that.
Okay. But
Yeah.
put it in some sort of supportive.
Something supportive,
environment
correct.
And
Yep.
and glass and inside somewhere.
Yeah, and that would probably be what we recommend if there's a real need to like preserve that surface. Yeah. And that happens a lot, that a stone just can't handle being outside anymore. It just can't. There's nothing you're going to be able to do. Mm-hmm.
In terms of having permission.
Yes.
Let's say a church
Yes.
owned a cemetery, historic, and then they gave it to a different organization, a different locality. And the
This
locality-
seems very hypothetical.
And the locality is the property owner. Does the property owner, does the locality whose property owner not have the permission to restore the stone? They don't have to go through the individual, the family that owns.
That is a Joanna question. I'm not going to touch that one. I think that you should ask Joanna. The other, do you think Jolene with the, I guess she only knows on the database where they are. She might not know ownership stuff. I'm not sure. There's going to be someone at DHR who's going to be able to help you with that. But my best guess, first talk to Joanna, second best guess would be that you're going to have to get into the legal weeds of ownership of the property, because Virginia's a very property owner rights state. So,
Ask you a related question that
Yeah.
you probably can't answer either.
excellent, let's go.
I mean, what if it's like your grandparents' stone within a church or municipal cemetery? Wouldn't you think that you as a descendant have some
Yeah, so
capacity to take care of that stuff?
I have listened to Joanna's lecture enough.
Good.
Over 13 years to know that there are certain rights for descendant groups. And so it is always best to just approach the property owner and work with them if you can. But if there's for some reason they are being unhelpful in allowing you to see your ancestors, there are legal ways to make sure that you can access them. Joanna knows more about that as well. Perfect. You also, before you start anything, want to test your cleaning methods. You could clean something and then all of a sudden the next day realize it's purple now. And you're kind of in trouble. So in general, it is good if you can figure out a way to test your cleaning method on the back of the stone where there's no information and no problems with the surface of the stone. It can just test a small area, come back the next day after it's totally dry. It's not saying that in a year from now it won't turn purple. I don't know, depends on what you're using. But having that before you just go straight for the front because that's where the information you have that you want is, definitely test it on the back. Even if you're just testing it at the beginning of the day and coming back, seeing that it's mostly dry, it's just a sort of safety measure that we try and do. start with the least aggressive method. I don't recommend lay people do cleaning with anything more than water. It is hard for, I'm hoping I'm instilling in you how complicated some of this can be. And so if you're going to do your own stones, it's best to get advice from somebody who has worked a lot in preservation of stones. And I have names for you if you want to get advice from somebody who's been out in the field doing this for a long time. Washing it with water alone can frequently get rid of a lot of dirt. If you can't get the result that you need from just water, there are sort of other things that you might be able to do. One of the things you have to consider when you're doing this is that you want to pre-wet your stone. I mean, like, the dirt gets dry, the lichen gets dry, the moss gets dry. If you do that first step of getting things really wet, it helps to loosen that dirt. It also helps to keep that cleaning solution on the surface because you won't be putting cleaning solution in and then it's wicking in. The stone will be full of water, and then that solution stays on the outside, and you don't have to worry about whatever's in your cleaning solution infiltrating the stone and causing any kind of crystallization happening, anything like that. So you want to get things really wet. You want to make sure you're cleaning in like random circular motions, because if you go in there and you clean, and you're always cleaning like this, you're going to start to get lines. You're going to get streaks. You're going to get, you're improving the erosion of it by doing this over and over again. So if you do it in random circular motions, you're not going to be creating these surfaces that erode as quickly later. You want to clean a marker from the bottom of the marker to the top. This helps prevent staining and streaks from happening on the marker. It seems counterintuitive, but it works. Use clean water. This is hard. You need a lot of water, and you're in a cemetery, which in general doesn't have, water. So you're going to want to have a lot of water, a lot more than you probably think. And so bringing clean, and I don't mean it has to be like the perfect water. If you have tap water, normal tap water is usually pretty good. What, you had a question? Oh, see, so here's the thing. When you start to filter water, it gets more acidic. So distilled water, deionized water, no, absolutely do not use those. They are way more acidic. So your normal tap water is going to be about pH 7. If you start to get into deionized, you're getting into 6. Distilled is like 5. And so you want to make sure you're not, I don't know, I've never actually tested the pH of Brita, but I would want to test that before I okayed it. So yes, I mean I have done weirder things. So you want to make sure you have enough clean water. This is some of most cleaners are going to be too hard on your stone. Something that is pH neutral and non-ionic, that is going to be okay for most stones, and pretty much every stone. Here's the problem with these soaps. They are very unsatisfying. Your soap that you use at home has surfactants in it that make it all sudsy because we have been taught through advertising that sudsy means clean. These don't have any of those, which is part of the reason they're safe for stones, so they don't suds. And it feels frustrating because you're not used to that with water that has soap in it, right? But it is soap. It will work. You do still want to make sure you're really rinsing it out of your stone. But in general, these non-ionic detergents are safe to use on stones. And you need very little. You'll see it on there. You need very little per a large amount of water. Always rinse thoroughly. You don't want anything that you're using to be left behind and cause staining or encourage any kind of biological growth. Okay, so let's get into don'ts. Don't remove lichen, which is, people get really frustrated with that because there's lichen everywhere. If you absolutely feel the need to remove lichen, do not remove it dry. Dry, it's going to start to rip apart your stones. lichen after like a good couple days soaking rain is really gross and slimy and comes out of stones a lot more safely. I would not recommend pulling lichen unless you have figured out why you're getting lichen, because it's just going to come back, and if you keep doing this over and over, you're going to cause damage to your stones. So these lichen are going in there, eating that cement that's holding together all of your stone and doing their thing. So removing it once, maybe for a special occasion, is fine, but if you're really frustrated by lichen, don't remove it until you have a good reason, or you've taken care of the sun issue or whatever it is that's causing it to be a good environment for lichen. Yeah. We already covered this a little. No metal brushes, nothing too abrasive, no abrasive pads. You're just going to do more damage. Nothing acid-based. There are a lot of acid-based solutions out there that say they're great for stones, and you know it's going to look clean afterwards. But what you're doing is stripping off the surface of the stone, and if you keep doing that and keep doing that, you are now the erosion. You are the acid rain. So anything that is an acidic cleaner, while it seems like it looks amazing, it is a problem in the long term. Don't use anything that's a household cleaner, especially things like Calgon and bleach. They can cause the same salt damage that you're going to get from like rising damp and things like that, so you will get salt in your stone and it will start to fall apart. For the love of God, no sandblasters, no pressure washing, no corn cobs. I'm trying to think of what else people have. If it's too hard on your skin, it is probably too much for a stone. So you remember the pliers from the last lecture. That was another case of a temporary fix becomes permanent, it sounds like. Temporary fixes become permanent because you literally, you're like, okay, that's going to hold it and it's going to be fine, and then you forget about it. That then becomes a huge danger to everybody who comes into the cemetery, because the rope will eventually break, the shims will eventually rot away, something is going to happen, and then that stone will not be safe anymore. So if you're going to fix it right. If you can't, then figure out a way to safely lay down the stone or deal with the safety issue. Put warning labels around it, anything like that, but do not try and temporarily fix something, because it will fail and it will be bad. And also, if you have something that fails like that, the stone will likely break on its way down. Okay. If you're going to reconstruct something, please get an expert. Don't put 5 inches of concrete around something like an obelisk or something, so that because it will work. It is not great. The other thing is that if you're using something, you can have things like this, where this reconstruction is probably too strong, and so it won't break where it was broken before. It's going to break above it and below it, and now you've got more problems. Or it's too weak and it breaks, and then you've damaged your stone because it crashed on the ground. So what conservators are trying to do when we do put things like back together, we want it to break where it was broken before and not create any new problems, which is where historic mortars come in and a lot of other practices. You get the same problem with epoxy, because epoxy is a lot stronger than other stones. There's almost nothing that will take it apart. Like the stained glass was saying, the water will infiltrate it and eventually it will fail. Again, this is epoxy. This is what epoxy can do, or more likely can't do. Because if you are not tidy, the epoxy will drip down onto what you're reading, and then you can't get it off, and you're going to damage the important part of the marker. Again, don't attempt mortar fills without expertise. If you don't know what you're doing, it's going to look a mess. You're probably using the wrong mortar for the stone. There's folks out there who understand their stones and their historic mortars, and you should talk to them. Oh my Lord. Okay, so
Yes.
the first time I gave this lecture in 2013, the person who gave a lecture before me was like, this is how you should read a stone. You should put shaving cream on it. And I was like brand new in this job, and I was like, I'm going to go up there and show why you should not do that. This is great. Shaving cream, chalk, clay, anything that you're going to rub in is probably going to be a problem in the long term for reading it later. My most recent favorite one was I used flour to read the stone. And then when the person asked me from the county, was like, this is going to be okay, because the person's like, flour, it's great, it's going to wash off. I sent them a webpage for how to make glue for kindergartners, because that is what is going to happen more likely than not in Virginia. So now you have paste in your letters, and eventually maybe, but in the meantime, it's going to feed so much stuff. So please don't do that. This is actually another good point for this part of town, because if there's even a chance of frost, remember how I told you to like really put all that water in? If you think it's going to frost within like a week, that water is not going to have had time to evaporate, and then it is going to do exactly the freeze-thaw cycle that Mother Nature is doing, except for now you did it. So be very cognizant of the weather. You can't always predict it, but try and think about doing it in the spring, sometime when it's not going to freeze in a week. This is very tempting. It is not safe. You are likely not the only person making rubbings, and if you've ever seen any of the ones that are very popular, they have been rubbed away. It is also very likely that you will end up leaving rubbing material like the crayon, the lead, whatever you're doing, onto the stone, and again, you're creating that problem of something is going to grow on it, or it's going to stain your marker. So that now that I told you don't do anything to read your marker, I have to tell you how you can read your marker, or else I'm just mean. So you're usually dealing with markers that have some kind of erosion and are hard to read, and they're usually in the shade, and you're not getting a lot of contrast. So how are we going to increase the amount of light there? You could take anything that's reflective. I've seen people use those big photo reflectors. I've seen people use cardboard with like tinfoil on it and try and reflect light in that direction. Use your phone if you have one that has a flashlight. There's really high energy flashlights that you can put on the side and create this raking light that will help you read what you need to read. If you are handy with a digital camera or digital software to manipulate photographs, that can also be your friend. It can help bring out details. The most interesting version of digital reading that I've seen lately is somebody put something into ChatGPT to try and read a stone, and it was okay. But it gives you a start to see, oh, that's what he's saying, and now maybe that is. So it might give you a start. Don't trust AI. Do not. But there are some now programs out there that can kind of help you get you started with reading things that are difficult to read. If you can wait for a rainy day, that rain really does help bring out those details. There are helpful resources out there. There's American Institute for Conservation, of which I am a fellow. They have a Find a Professional page where you can ask for a conservator, not just for cemeteries, for anything, any of your family heirlooms, anything like that. Department of Historic Resources, obviously, we're here to help. And Joanna and I worked with Fairfax County Cemetery, Fairfax County to make this cemetery preservation manual, and it is very good. When in doubt, call a conservation expert. If you think that you don't know what you're doing, are going to hurt yourself or others, are going to damage the stone, you are not legally allowed to be there, call the person who can help you and tell you what to do. There's no Ian Ridgway, and I can give you my card if that's easier. Joanna Wilson-Green, who could not be here tonight, is an expert in all of the symbolism that you find, all of the legal stuff, which is a wild ride in Virginia. She deals with, she comes out and helps communities if there's something really wrong with your cemetery, so you can just call her and ask her questions. If you have a preservation, you can call her or email her. You can email me. If you ask me a preservation question, I'd really love a picture, and I'd really love there to be some kind of scale in it, so I can, because like they come in all different sizes, and it helps to know how big a marker is. So I'm always happy to answer questions. I'm always happy to get you in touch with professionals who can answer the questions better than me sometimes. So yeah, so that's very fast run through of cemetery preservation. Yeah. So does anyone have, yes?
No, there's probably no solution to this, but looking at some of the things about what to do and what not to do. I mean, 2 minutes on Instagram, and you will see, like, the worst practices ever. I mean, everything you've said not to do, I have seen somebody on Instagram.
Paint scrapers.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
self-styled
Yeah.
experts.
Yes.
How do you counter that? Or, I mean, what do you do?
This
Idiot.
come and talk to people. Hope for common sense. There are definitely some TikTokers who have been more of a problem than others. I recognize the frustration because they want something to be done quickly, and they also feel like sometimes that government is hard to get in touch with, and we aren't timely enough. And I understand all of those things, but when it comes to preserving something that is literally the information about the history of your town, it really does, it needs to be a slow process. One of the things I actually forgot to mention is that we don't recommend you clean stone markers more than once every 10 years. Otherwise, you're really going to start to do damage. Yeah. And at DHR, we do not support the use of D2, and if you want me to get into that. And not just D2, I shouldn't just say that product. Also, I think it's Wet and Forget. There's a few other ones. Anything with quaternary ammonium compounds, that's what you're going to see on there. I say D2 because it's the most well-known, but Wet and Forget is the other one, and I feel like there's a third one that's a quaternary ammonium compound, because there have started to become, there's issues with them that have started to recently come out that we've had concerns about. So.
I mean, this misinformation proliferates so quickly.
Yes.
And so broadly.
Yes.
That it's just staggering.
Yeah, but it's not, I mean, it's not just cemeteries, it's everything these days, I know. Yeah, so the best we can do is provide good information so that hopefully when people Google, we're the ones that come to the top. And hopefully people in Virginia have enough sense to ask the right questions. But this is also the reason I drove 5 hours out here to talk to you guys, because I think it's important that you see my face, you meet me, I'm not some kind of faceless, horrible monster in my lab. And that if you have questions, you know how to get in touch with me and how to ask me. The only way we can do it is that way. I'm never going to be a social media whatever. I'm just not that person. But yeah, I don't know how you. If you figure out a way, let me know. Yeah.
I seem to remember hearing that some people used to bring out inscriptions to aluminum powder.
Oh, that's a new one. I love it when there's a new one. I have not heard of aluminum powder being used. It would be a problem, just like most everything is a problem. Aluminum corrodes pretty quickly. I also, some of these things that people are using, I also wonder if it has an issue with the environment. Like if you're leaving aluminum in the ground, I don't know what that's doing. But no, I wouldn't recommend it because it's going to cause corrosion. It's going to cause damage, yeah, and staining.
I was approached early this morning by somebody who's on my committee who said they have been approached by folks who make the product that's used in Arlington Cemetery clean tombstones, and they would be very happy to give us a sample to try for ours.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about that.
Please.
That is actually D2, which is why it comes up the most, because it was part of the test of the Arlington Cemetery in the NCPTT technical report, which is now 15 or more years old. This is what you need to keep in mind about quaternary ammonium compounds. They were tested mostly in Arlington during this one study. There was very little follow through with figuring out how this was going to go down the road. Arlington is a military cemetery where every single stone is exactly the same. It's the same material, there's no metals, there's no nothing. So we don't know how it works with metals. We don't know how it works with anything, but I think marble, is what they're using. When their stones are damaged, they are immediately replaced because that is how the military works with their stones, which is amazing. But it means that when you compare Arlington with literally whatever is going on in your historic cemetery with gazillions of different metals and stones and glass and whatever and 100 years of whatever the heck somebody else did before you, is it going to be, are you going to put something on there, and I'm not just saying quaternary ammonium compounds, but are you going to put something on there that's going to get into the iron pillars that are in these stones and then cause them to corrode? They didn't do any tests as far as I'm aware, and I've talked to them and asked them to send me any of like all their studies and things, and I've never heard back. Here's the other thing that has recently come out, which is interesting. They are finding that quaternary ammonium compounds have the same issue as antibiotics. There is a certain amount of these biological materials on stones that are not killed. They're not killed by the D2. And so they come back crazier and stronger. And so there are places, especially around DC, where they have been using quaternary ammonium compounds for decades and are now not able to clean their stones with it because it won't kill it.
It's like the MRSA of.
It's, I mean, well, and also, but it's also like if you use Roundup,
Yeah.
you're killing
Yes.
really like easy to remove weeds, and then you get the brambles, and then you get the things that are hard to remove, right? Right. Yes. Oh my God. Don't even with hogweed. So quaternary ammonium compounds seem like the quick and easy way to do things. I have been nervous about them for a while. I have talked to some folks who do stuff in South Carolina, and they were putting it. One time they were putting it in their copper cans. And I was talking to them on the phone, and they were like, yeah, we were getting green coming out of it because they thought maybe something was coming out of the copper can. So I'm not saying any of that is proof. I'm not saying any of that has been tested. That is my concern, though, is that I haven't seen anything that tells me what is happening with these metals or glass or anything else. And we are starting to see this long-term problem of biological things that are not being killed by the quaternary ammonium compounds and starting to take over stone surfaces. There's a great woman named Judy Jacobs who studies all these like microbes, and it's amazing. She works for National Park Service, who's done a lot of studies on these. You're welcome.
I was just going to mention, since
Yes.
Grant is in the title and Grant is my purview at HR, not these grants specifically. It's kind of funny, we kind of split off the cemetery grants away from other grants, but we have two grant funds for cemeteries in HR. There's our Revolution War Graves and Cemeteries grant, which is like kind of ours, but kind of not.
I think most of our grants are kind of ours and kind of not.
Yeah, I don't know how that actually works right now, so don't ask me questions about that one. You can go on our website and try and do something about it, see how that gives it to somebody else. But the main one is our African American Cemetery
Yes.
Graves Fund. And for this, it can be for maintenance, regular maintenance kinds of things, small projects, or they also do fund the larger cemetery rehabilitation.
We're finally, we have what we consider Sinking Spring Cemetery, segregated cemetery. Russell Road runs right in the middle. We've got the white people on the left, and then we've got the black people on the right. And we, as a township, have known for generations that that's the black or the colored cemetery or whatever. But we've never had it historically signified. And Betty has been doing the footwork, the legwork to get us, because everyone's been very surprised that, well, everybody knows. It's like, well, the state didn't know. We had no idea.
There are so many communities that are, because I've gone out to cemeteries where they're like, and that's where, and then they'll show me this like ridiculously old map that has it labeled, and I'm like, you need to get that to Joanna.
Yeah,
Right.
I was like,
Because then she can go and
somebody
help.
telling her like, oh, I was metal detected and found an enslaved cemetery. She's like, can you send me the exact GPS coordinates and then you have to go back there again, please?
Yeah.
Salisbury, North Carolina, did a really interesting thing. Now you've got a road that's separated, they have a wall, and they've done sort of an art installation where they've taken a portion of the wall down and left it down in a kind of artistic manner to connect the two cemeteries. And it's a very striking, I mean, it sounds destructive to knock down part of the wall, but the way they've done it is very artful and tasteful, and you know, just really speaks to trying to knit that back together. So you might want to, I think it's Salisbury, North Carolina. Really nice example.
Well, the road went through the middle of ours, and I have always like, okay, I'm fairly sure that at one time, somehow, these two properties were one property, because it was all church. And so when the road went through, it got plowed up.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That happens a lot.
We got a little Civil War, unknown soldiers, and they probably got a little bit of plow through, but they weren't from here, so it doesn't make any difference. They only died at train wreck in '62, so whatever. And then there's the Black Cemetery, and I'm thinking, okay, how many folks are literally bedrock of Russell Road?
So, I was just gonna add, I know that y'all are looking to do some research about that, okay? This grant fund that we offer is not the best for that in particular, but once you're looking to do an actual maintenance and rehabilitation of your cemetery, that's something we want to look into, and y'all, as the staff, are able to manage that, and that's it.
Didn't they just recently extend the time period too for this grant? I think.
I'm not sure.
I think they did. And one other thing I just want to say about quaternary ammonium compounds is, like antibiotics, if they're used correctly, you're probably going to be fine. And so when people talk about that, I'm like, work with a conservation professional who knows like the pros and cons of using these things, who has done more research or something. Because if you use it on a stone and it's 10 or 15 years between uses and you're using it correctly, who knows? It's probably fine. It's the groups that have been using it every year consistently that are seeing this sort of issue with it no longer working. So it's like a tool in your toolbox. It has uses. It's just you using that all the time can be dangerous, just like any tool. Yeah.
But basically, water in the soft scrub brush.
That would make my heart happy.
Okay.
But I know it's frustrating. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything, you're always welcome to get in touch with me. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment on an observation on reading inscriptions.
Yes.
We have a family cemetery that's heavily damaged by acid rain. Go up there, can't read anything, except you go up there when the sun's setting, it's like the stones come alive.
It's true. It is true. That raking light, really helps. Yep, and then you can artificially make it with a flashlight if you don't feel like waiting until sunset or sunrise. God forbid, I would not be out there that early. Sometimes it depends because the cemeteries, depending on which direction they're right, they're usually very directional, right? So yeah.
One final grant plug. We do also have other grant funds. Sorry, we do also have other grant funds, like the cost share program that Adam has received a number of times for different projects. They can fund certain types of archaeological studies of cemeteries, so above ground, non-invasive research. And part of why you really want to do that above ground, non-invasive research is that I learned from Gregory that bodies don't like to stay where you put them. They once things are below the ground, they don't stay in one place.
No.
And also there's a lot of holes,
And
space, and tree roots love to go through those.
And walls are almost always incorrect. So if you have a wall, it's almost always wrong. There's usually people outside that wall. And one of the things that I've heard of most commonly is groundhogs going in, finding a coffin and thinking, this is a great house, and then pulling the human remains out, like skeletons usually, and then leaving them on the surface, and then somebody finds like human remains in their cemetery and is a little worried about it. But it's just a groundhog evicted the previous occupant and then took over the coffin. Which, fair.
Yeah.
So, say that again?
They're the bane of my existence.
I don't doubt it because good luck. Good luck trying to keep them out of your cemetery. Yeah. Yeah, they're diggers. Okay, any other questions? I'm glad, even if I am very bad at spelling apparently. And
That was not your fault.
I mean, I should have noticed it. I'm from Hampton. I'm from very far away. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And I know that you will correct it. So.
I am immediately going to correct it now. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed it out because that's so in 20 years when I'm back or whatever, or next year, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Before we end, just for who's here and who's ever watching, these are live and like our town council meetings and everything. I hope today you kind of see that, the point of this is to make connections, to show that, half of your town staff that are in charge of your historic district. They're here to help you. The state is here to help you. You know, all you have to do is ask. That's the biggest thing. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next year.
Yay! Thank you.